Hello, 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 and welcome to Fiddler's Green podcast. I'm on the wrong slide. Fiddler's Green podcast number 58. The throne is empty. And I'd like to wish everyone welcome back to the podcast. We didn't have one, I guess not last week, but 2 weeks ago, because it was indeed Holy Week. But now it is finally Easter, and I can say that Christ has risen. Congratulations. Alleluia. Christ is risen. But, I've been thinking, risen. Christ rises. He rises like the sun in the morning. And what else happens in the morning is you have coffee. And when you have coffee, usually the most popular brand is Folgers. And Folgers brand name is the best part of waking up. Oh my God. I think Easter might be woke. I think Easter might be, it involves waking up because of the Folger connection. It's so clear. It's so clear that the Easter it's a woke right conspiracy, guys. I'm sorry. I couldn't resist it. This was not part of the plan. But if those of you guys who are on Twitter and who have been, I have been cracking up for the last 6 hours since this latest interview between James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson dropped. I didn't even watch the interview, just the clip circulating where, Jordan Peterson is doing, and I don't know, it's amazing to see how far these people have fallen, because these people have been around forever. and they're just these people have been broken by the internet. These people have been absolutely broken by the internet. And I guess I'm a little bit glad that I'm not doing this professionally. This is essentially a side gig because I mean, I guess you could say Jordan Peterson was broken by a drug addiction. He was broken by a benzo addiction having to do with depression and some very very questionable practices at a Russian rehab clinic. But I don't know, is James Lindsay also on drugs? Because they're in this conversation and Jordan's doing his usual thing, in this incredibly weirdly tailored suit that looks like he's an extra on the Mister Rogers show, talking about his usual Jungian stringing together a symbolic meaning, which I mean I like this guy's posting too as much as the next person. I had a huge, very very long series on books that was completely schizophrenic, connecting all these different threads. And but he's doing this whole thing about the symbolic meaning of Satan and Lucifer, the morning star, and James Lindsay go, "Oh, Lucifer, the morning star, the morning star. What do you do in the morning? You wake up. Lucifer is woke. He's wokeness. He's Luciferian is wokeness." And just is this a free association game? Is this like it's absolute internet insanity? And James Lindsay goes on. He's like, the people on the internet, they're trying to get under my skin. They're playing this psychological game with me. They're playing this psychological game with me. Whenever I say something is woke, like because the morning star happens in the morning and you wake up, and that means it's woke, or Folgers says the best thing about waking up, therefore Folgers is woke. Every time I connect the threads about how Aaron McIntyre secretly worships a Zoroastrian demon Ahriman, and how it's all part of a giant theosophic conspiracy. The people on the internet tell me, we're all laughing at you. This is a psychological game, Jordan Peterson. This is a psychological game the internet has to try to get under my skin. Maybe. Maybe, James, that it could be a giant conspiracy to gaslight you into thinking that people are, or people are might be actually laughing at you. What did you eat for breakfast today, James Lindsay? What would it feel like if you hadn't eaten breakfast today, James? Breakfast is served in the morning. Mornings when you wake up. That question it's an allusion to wokeness. This is a woke signal. Jordan Peterson, of course, this is a dark triad trait. This is the reason why all right wingers are sociopaths, because they're exhibiting dark triad traits. And let me psychologize. It's just, I don't know. I mean, I guess the pattern that they got down for themselves, it kind of consumed them. I think I already talked about this article, but this phenomenal landmark article by John Carter about, I forget what it's called, but he talks about sort of the end of all internet processes is essentially to generate into incoherency. This is something that we've known this thing for a long time about neural networks. But if you imagine the human mind as a neural network, and you can imagine that it works something like an LLM, obviously. LLMs are not minds, and they don't think in any sense that we understand what it means to think. But if you take a neural network model and you kind of do the human centipede thing, where you take the output of the neural network model and then you flip it around and you make the output of the neural network its training data. Well, if you do that, what happens is, like, the neural network chokes to death on its own data. It becomes sort of a stereotype of itself. So the neural network essentially is trying to come up with a list of associations that best represents a set of data experiences, and it kind of descends. It kind of, if you want to imagine it, I mean, I'm an optimization person, right? But the parameters of the neural network descend as to be kind of like a stereotype of the input experiences that it's been exposed to, which this is very much like how the human mind obtains impressions, which is why it mimics human behavior so well. If you take the output of the model and bring it to the input, suddenly it's impression of the world becomes a stereotype of itself, and then that stereotype becomes a stereotype of the stereotype, and the stereotype becomes the stereotype of the stereotype, until you have this like utter gobbledygook nonsense that's just it's just the algorithm plus the iterations on the algorithm. I think that's what you see from Lindsay and Jordan Peterson. It's the involution of their own brand. Like their audience loved this so much, and now they're just going to kind of iterate on their own patterns. They're going to double down on their own proclivities and become kind of stereotypes of themselves. I guess this is. I mean, it is really bizarre. It is really bizarre to see, and I guess it's funny. I mean, with Jordan Peterson, I just feel sorry for the guy, because it's genuinely a man who's. I mean, is he too old to be doing this? Probably not. But with his medical emergency and with his drug addictions, he's just not up to this task. And in the meantime, he's undermining all of the work that he's done and has become a complete self stereotype. And of course, James Lindsay, what is in there to say about that's just genuinely funny. I'm sorry. I was never a big James Lindsay fan. I was like, I always associated him with Peter Boghossian. And if people don't know this about me, I cut my teeth. I cut my teeth doing this kind of discourse stuff and this blogging stuff, being a very, very new Christian in Portland, Oregon, attending the kind of Peter Boghossian atheist meetup groups. And, also there, I remember from that was Andy No, who was also part of the scene at that time. And, I always, and I do appreciate Peter Boghossian's honesty. I do appreciate the fact that this is a man who can kind of actually like think independently of his presuppositions. He can look around and see that the times are changing, and he doesn't get like caught in this involution bubble. Or maybe does he? Because I mean, he basically, of all his atheist and secular colleagues in Portland, he was one of the first people to get out ahead of this wokeness stuff, and I guess that's to his credit. But he was never able to see all of the deeper problems with wokeness that led to the things that impacted his worldview as a liberal. And so he just kind of circled this drain, and it was really obvious. Even this is obviously, what was 2012, 2013 or something like that. This is well before, I mean, it was just about the time of the Great Awakening. Obviously, this was Portland, so we were getting it earlier. But even though it was so obvious that Boghossian, and I guess by extension James Lindsay, although I never met James Lindsay at any of these events. I don't think he was even living in Portland at the time, or maybe he was, and I just didn't remember him. But it was very, very obvious that Boghossian's attitudes, his perspectives, were totally unable to deal with the issues that were going to be brought about by the new era of political conflict. And you were kind of getting people who were looking, I mean, this is kind of like Gamergate before Gamergate. They were looking for sort of an entertainment product that would kind of replace the high they had got from being on the right side of history with Obama. And now they're looking for like a new way to be on the right side of history, a new way to get down with what the intelligent people are doing and have discourse, and the way these people think discourse works, which is not how discourse actually works. But I don't know. It's a mystery. It's a mystery why he got the appeal. And I was never a big fan of his. But if nothing else, the devolution of James Lindsay is just one of the most hilarious things that I've seen in a long time. It probably is sad if I was to kind of contemplate like the potential of what he had to offer. But other than that, it's just the comedy moments are. I was just chuckling to myself hearing that clip across the entire day. I couldn't get over it, which is probably an indictment of me and my very, very simple sense of humor. But it's interesting. I mean, this is kind of where I find myself, and I didn't do a podcast. I skipped a podcast episode, largely because of Holy Week, and it's interesting. Every Lent, I kind of go off Twitter. I don't go offline altogether. I'm still on Substack, which is this year it was just as bad because Substack has very predictably become almost like a Twitter of itself. So I don't know if I got like the full effect of being away, but it did have this effect where I'm like, okay, like I can stand back from the Twitter madness, and things happen on Substack. There's microblogging. You get all the drama, but you kind of get like the after action report on the drama. Like you don't experience it. Like you're not in it. You just hear about it afterwards in the articles. And even the people who do this like notes thing, like I did, you don't. You're kind of trying to. It's a lot slower. There's not an instant feedback, and that's very quickly changing. Again, Substack notes is becoming like Twitter Lite essentially, but it very much feels like you're seeing things kind of from a detached point of view. But I've been trying to pay more attention to the real world, to the outside reality. And as people know, my family right now is kind of in this very strange in between spot, this very strange, you know, holding pattern, I guess you should say. I mean, we're looking for a house. We're living in Canada, and I know there's drama going on. Like I'm not watching the news, but all my in-laws are talking about is the Canadian election, the Canadian election, the Canadian election. I don't participate in Trump's tweets about annexing Canada or it becoming the 51st state, but like I hear about it from everywhere else, and I obviously hear about it on Substack. But it's going around. Like I drive a car and it has American plates, and we come back to Canada. We know we're not going to stay here, but we're living with relatives temporarily. Well, we try to find a permanent location in the States, and everyone is like, it's all changed. Like it's changed in 5 years. This island, we're on Vancouver Island. This island has completely demographically transformed itself. As many of my Canadian friends know, Canada increased its population by, what was it, like 4% in 2 years or something insane like that, right? It's absolutely unheard of demographic change in the last half decade, and a vast majority of it, or a large portion of it, has ended up in British Columbia, and just the entire face of everywhere has immediately become distinct, and people are more standoffish, especially after COVID. Canadians had this kind of, it was always a little off-putting to me. They're big, and this is something that I guess my first experiences in Canada were always in Montreal, but at least in the English-speaking parts of Canada, there was this kind of like bland agreeableness. They were kind of people who went along to get along, but at the same time, there was like this easygoing nature to them. They were, how could you get into a fight with a Canadian? Like, just think about it. I'm thinking of like John Candy, Northern Exposure, all of those stereotypes about like the guy with the bear claw and the Tim Hortons mug. These guys were like laid back people. These people were people who were, maybe rule followers, but they weren't going to like do you dirty or anything like that. Or a good example, like Trailer Park Boys. I mean, this is the Canadian underclass you're viewing. Do Americans know that show? It's obviously about I think it's not Newfoundland. It's Nova Scotia. Yeah, Nova Scotia. That's I believe the province it represents. Is the Canadian underclass. They're like gangsters, but they're like incredibly laid back rule breakers, and they just have a series of harebrained schemes. And this is my stereotype of Canadians. But now, like everyone, it's almost like kind of COVID. They kind of went from being laid back rule followers to being kind of like these asshole, I'm going to spy on you to make sure you're complying, respect my privacy, kind of like really, really mean. And as the diversity very predictably has amped up in this very, very liberal area that I live in, everyone has gotten a lot more paranoid. Everyone's gotten a lot more. Everyone's gotten a lot more. And so, I mean, oh my God, I can't. Can you believe it? The Putin effect is real. Who would have guessed that increasing the diversity of area would cause everyone to just turtle up in their own little cocoons? Now, a part of it also is that when I lived here previously, I was in my. We were married, but we didn't have kids. We weren't taking care of a young child. Our friends were mostly single. Like, people were doing things socially, and it was before COVID, and social things actually went on. And that all shut down. I mean, part of it again is that we have kids, and married people live their boring lives. We work, we eat our dinner, we play with the kids, we go to bed, we do the same thing again. And maybe if you're lucky, you get little social things sometimes on the weekends. And of course, I have my side hustle with the podcast, which is kind of like my little parasocial replacement activity. But it's not just that. Everything is kind of like they're all kind of locked. They don't want to acknowledge reality, but they're laser focused. Everyone's laser focused on politics. And Canadian politics are never very interesting. Canadian politics, they're just they're usually just, I mean, of course, Justin Trudeau is kind of a train wreck. And for a while, it seemed, when I was traveling here a few years ago, when I was up in Tofino, it felt like maybe the nation can unify around our common hatred of Justin Trudeau, to the point where beach bums in a resort town are booing the prime minister's limo when it drives through town. You felt that maybe there was a moment where there would be like a genuine realignment, and people would kind of collectively come to their senses and get past this kind of ridiculous political dynamic. But oh no, of course not. It apparently seems that everyone for the last month, since I've been offline, everyone's developed this huge hate bone towards Americans. And it's so I'm driving my American car around town. My wife got injured in an accident. So for about 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the election, I was doing most of the errands and taking my son around to playgrounds. And every time I went out with this car, people would honk and yell at me because I had an American plate. And every single time it was next to like a Canadian real estate establishment. So it wasn't that much of a problem when I went to like Walmart, or if I went to McDonald's. I have a kid. He likes chicken McNuggets, so I hate this restaurant. But sometimes it occurs. But then I would go to the real Canadian Superstore, or I would go to Canadian Tire, and people would honk at my vehicle because it had American plates. It's like the real estate establishment is where the patriotism of the Canadians, this is where they feel it in their bones. Like in America, the patriotism hits hard when you go to the Empire State Building, or when you go to the Grand Canyon or Mount Rushmore. In Canada, it's Canadian Superstore. It's Canadian Tire. It's Tim Hortons. I'm sitting there in line, trying to get a coffee, and of course, because this is Canada, this is the truth for all things. Like in America, I know what a medium steak is, and in Canada, in America, a medium steak, for my money, it's pink, not red. In Canada, a medium steak is burnt to a crisp. You have to go full rare before you even get any pink. It's the exact opposite of Europe. In Europe, I asked for a medium well done steak, and the thing looked like it was ripped fresh off the steer. It was bleeding and writhing on my plate. It was so red. But in Canada, it's the exact opposite. Everything's burnt to a crisp, and all of their coffee is way too sweet. So you basically, if you ask them for cream and sugar, the coffee tastes like a milkshake. It's still pretty good coffee at Tim Hortons, but but it's my option. I'm going somewhere. I need to get a coffee because I'm a caffeine addict. because I sleep like 4 hours a night. That's my I don't wake up. That means I'm not woke, right? That's the key, James Lindsay. Since I don't sleep very much, I'm kind of like I'm awake all the time. Woke right. I've been exposed. Anyway, I'm in line to get a cup of coffee, and like this hick is behind me, just honking all through the line, and I'm furious. Like I go to roll down my window to do the order, and the guy's like, "F you, American, go home." And I'm like, I get furious. Like I get furious. I get my coffee. I go pull over. I ask myself like, I get out of my car. I'm so angry, and the guy runs by me, like yelling curses at me, waves the middle finger at me. I'm like, this guy gonna get out? Am I gonna have a fist fight in the parking lot of Tim Hortons? Are the headlines gonna read like right wing blogger is is killed in knife fight over a Tim Hortons double coffee? I mean, but of course, like, this guy drives on, but like, this is like, I can't imagine a less Canadian stereotype. Like this is like I'm a black person in the South. Like, hey, we don't take kindly to your types here. We don't take kindly to Americans and our Tim Hortons. This is Canada. If you don't like our Tim Hortons, you can get out. You can get out. Because it's not blood and soil. It's not blood and soil. It's the real thing about Canada is other real countries have like blood and soil. The people are the blood, and the soil is like what you defend, right? Well, in Canada, like I've walked into Canadian Tire, no one reacts to me, no one knows that I'm American. I do have a Californian accent, but nobody reacts to me being there with a Californian accent, like my little lisp that everyone always makes fun of me for. No one reacts to that. They react when they see the license plate. They react when they see like the driver's license from New Jersey. They react when the government ID comes out. Like that's when their heckles come out. That's when like the blood raises up. I'm like, oh my God. Americans are here. It's like it's like how a stereotyped Southerner would like react to seeing black skin. Like when they see the government ID, and the government ID is next to a Canadian real estate. We don't take kindly to American IDs crossing over to our sacred real estate. Other countries have blood and soil. They protect the soil for their blood. In Canada, we have real estate and government ID nationalism. We protect the real estate establishment from the intrusion of foreign government IDs. Oh boy. And of course, the genesis of this, like all of these, like, they're not harrowing interactions, but there are reactions that are kind of memorable to me because they're so out of line with like my usual experience of this country. My usual experience of Canada is that they're compliant, laid back people, and now I'm getting into these experiences that feel like I'm in some kind of like Leonard Skinner trucker pub in Arkansas or something like that. This is. What happened? All of these real world interactions, all of these uncomfortable situations, and it's a tweet. It's a fucking tweet. I'm off of Twitter, but Twitter isn't off me. I get to experience the psychic damage that people are reacting to because of mean Trump tweets. This gets carried over. And I get to experience it secondhand. And now, thanks to immigration and thanks to like psychic indoctrination, the involution of the Canadian personality, we have constructed an entirely fake type of weird Canadian nationalism. I'm not in like Saskatchewan. I'm not in Alberta. I am not in like anywhere near where conservative Canadian nationalists, like this is a very, very friendly state to Trudeau's party. If anyone voted for the increased immigration, these people love immigrants. These people voted for more immigrants. I know most people are like, well, we didn't vote for that. And indeed, they didn't. Morgoth is correct. This was never put up to a vote. But insofar as immigration is the predictable consequence of having liberals or progressives in power, this area of the country certainly voted for that. So, like, ostensibly, they're fine with completely being replaced by immigrants from the subcontinent. Like, I look around and all the places that used to be staffed by heritage Canadians are now staffed by people who come from the subcontinent. The entire demographics has switched around, but they'll be damned if they let a dirty American into their sacred Tim Hortons without without a confrontation. We have standards here, sir. We have standards, don't you know? Uh, I'm kind of glad that we got out of the country for the election. I took the vacation, came down to my native California, spent Easter weekend and the next week, and my family is incredibly generous. Especially the older people in the family, and we're having like a little mini reunion. And because obviously, my wife and I are trying to move back to the United States, and I think part of this was kind of to entice us back. Like, we want to give you a good experience on this vacation, and so they rent a bed and breakfast in this place called Bolinas. That's infamous if you're from California. That name. So Bolinas is this. It's near Stinson Beach. It's basically just north of San Francisco, and it's part of this Californian coastline that everyone always loves to film in. Alfred Hitchcock loved this location. It's near where they filmed the Return of the Jedi and all this stuff. This is like the hills, and like you're driving with your car and you're going back and forth, like almost driving off the cliff into the ocean. And obviously, what is it? Bolinas. It's this place. It's a bedroom community. It is rich as hell, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. The California coast, and the whole town is just like it's the land. It's the land that time forgot. This place, and this house my family rented for, I don't want to know how much. I'm very glad I was not involved in this. I would have certainly not done this myself. It was owned by the singers from Jefferson Airplane, like the Grateful Dead, like were there and like wrote some songs there. And this is Bolinas in a nutshell. It's like this little town. It pretends to be all hippy dippy, and everyone there is a complete asshole. I actually didn't have any bad experiences this time I went to Bolinas, but every time I've been there, otherwise, it's just like you go around and you're paying like a lot of money for these bed and breakfasts. Again, I didn't pay for it, thank God. This is just the generosity of my family, and maybe their attempt to get me to move back to the Golden State. You're someone's making fun of my pronunciation. Bolinas. Yeah, it's what is the actual pronunciation? I don't know. I'm kind of curious now. Bolinas. Yeah, yeah, that's it. It's Bolinas. Or did I mispronounce it? Yeah. I don't think I did pronounce it. It's Bolinas. Okay. Did I not? Now you guys are making me subconscious, but everyone in this town lives on income from bed and breakfast rentals. Yet everyone, like the population there, like they immediately recognize you as a tourist, and they treat you like you're like a colonizer. Everyone is here, and the California, this area of California is deliberately kept in a state that's isolated. Bolinas. It's Bolinas. Okay. This area of California is kept in a sort of perpetual time warp. It's kept in this state that looks like it comes from the and was it the 1960s? I think that's more or less. I mean, there's a few new constructions there that are made out of glass and are obviously, built in the 2000s. But other than that, like, no one's been developing this area. It has had none of the incursions and of the explosion in the California population, and everyone there is just the biggest shit lib imaginable, and you're kind of just, I don't know, you're kind of wandering around this place wondering, like, you're in this like walled garden, like, and everywhere else I go in California, I'm fully in 2025. I walk into a Target. I walk into a gas station. I walk down the street in my hometown. It is very apparent that we are in 2025 California. Like, you can feel like the sense that the internet has created this kind of hysteria around people, the same way that it was like the hysteria and paranoia seemed to kind of have infested all of the Canadians in Vancouver Island. In Target, like, there's this kind of like standoffish. Everyone's kind of eyeing each other. Everyone's kind of trying to size up what tribe you belong to. Are you a boomer? Are you a dreaded Trump supporter? Are you part of the progressive coalition? And if so, are you part of the right ones? Are you the right ethnic group of Asian? Are you the right ethnic group of Hispanic? What's going on? And like, and everything's kind of brought to a head by like the weird need to like consume product and climb the corporate ladder and like siphon off your little segment of the American dream before the whole thing kind of collapses into the ocean. And in that world, everywhere else I travel in California, like, it's 2025, but on these coastal towns, the time has been arrested, and we've created this little bubble for ourselves, and we're gonna stay here. And it's kind of ironic because I'm walking along the beach, and you look at the houses. The houses are all built on the cliff sides, going down the ocean, and they were built. Most of them were built in, I believe, the 30s, maybe 40s. It was definitely the early 20th century. This is a very popular place for a very long time, and they were built on like these giant poles that were stuck into the earth, and they went down into the cliffside. The problem is that the erosion from the ocean is slowly stripping away the cliffs, and it's exposing the areas like of the decks that are jutting out, so you can get like the little view into the ocean that people pay so much money for. And it's gotten to the point where like the decks are sliding they're sliding down into the chaos of the ocean, and it's kind of an analogy of like the whole situation. Like, you've created this bubble for yourself in like the height of this location in the 60s, but everywhere else around you is like this roiling mess, and it's slowly degrading it, that your house is eventually going to get swept out. It's like the same story everywhere. You go look for houses. You walk into a housing development, and I'm not a young guy. I'm old. I'm an old guy at this stage, But everyone else looking for houses, they're all gray haired. They're all boomers. Like, they're all looking for like these little kind of cute mansions, and like in areas where it looks kind of like California used to look like. Or alternatively, it's like, it's Asians or Indians from Silicon Valley kind of looking to cash in their fuck you money in a place that's more or less stable. And they're all looking for like these areas of isolation that they can kind of hide away from the world and be in their own little world. And you just have to, how long is this going to last? How long is it? It was kind of like, at some point, and I think this is really COVID. At some point, now this was absolutely COVID. the boomers went from trying to fix the world before COVID to trying to kind of shut the door on the world during COVID. And they just kind of stopped providing guidance to the world. They're like, okay, we can't fix these problems. They're too complicated. So we're going to try to like excise the problems. They're going to try to take Trump out of the discourse, regardless of what it means for government credibility. We're going to try to censor the internet. We're going to try to pull all the strings to get back to the place we thought we were going in 2008. And to the extent that that doesn't work, we're just going to shut the door and lock the world away. And that's been the trajectory and any disturbance to this is going to is treated as like this utter like betrayal. Like you know, if you have a kid, right, or if you have any opinions that kind of are markedly from the modern day, boomers kind of look at you like, how dare you disrupt my experience of retirement? Like, all the boomers wanted to retire in 1985 or in 1995 or, you know, maximally 2005. And they're in their little bubble. And if you disturb that bubble by reminding them that, you know, there's another generation that needs to be raised, or that there are problems that cannot be put into the boxes of 20th century politics, or that cannot be blamed on Orange Man or the Russian Hitler bear and Putin or any of these other bad actors, then you are hurting them physically. You are ruining their retirement. And that's kind of what the election was in Canada. You know, I get back online, I guess. I get back on Twitter after Easter. And, you know, okay, what's going on? Well, the Canadian election. I guess, I mean, this is the graph everyone was talking about. And this is the picture everyone was talking about. You know, the new our new Prime Minister Carney. You know, the boomer of boomers with his two middle fingers bared towards the next generation. Elbows up, Canada, elbows up. You might have to actually enter the 21st century. You might actually have to take on the challenges that we are collectively facing as a species. You might actually have to decide what your identity is outside from just consuming real estate and retail and kicking all questions of existential meaning down the road. Sure. Or, you know, we could deal with all these questions, or we could just elect the establishment again to punch back on Orange Man bad. Yes. You know, this is the Canadian election, the trajectory. The Conservative Party was a Pierre Poilievre. If I mispronounce, people are making fun of my pronunciation of Bolinas. They're gonna make fun of my pronunciation of Quebecois names. Look, guys, it's never been my thing. Of course, what is the most important thing for Canadians? Well, obviously, there was a huge swing in early April, coincidentally timed with Trump's tweeting of a variety of spicy things about Canada. And sure enough, you know, let's look at it by age. What do voters vote for? What do people want to see happen? Do you care about reducing your cost of living? Well, if you're a young person, you do. If you're an old person, not so much. Do you care about making housing more affordable? Well, you certainly don't if you're an older person. How about growing the economy or even making Canada a better place to live? No. Boomers don't care about that. What they care about, and the reason why they essentially handed power back to the existing government, is because the most important issue for the boomers of this country is to stick it to Donald Trump. I mean, who cares about your children? Who cares about your identity? Donald Trump is going to take away your Tim Hortons. Donald Trump is going to bring filthy Americans to Canadian Tire. You have to get your elbows up. Blue America is counting on you, Canada, to fight the good fight and to resist Trump. You are the resistance. Uh, indeed. I have no idea what to say about this. Is it the, arguably everyone's saying, oh, there wasn't really an option because Pierre Poilievre didn't actually want to reduce immigration. He just wanted to slow it down. Yes, but Carney and his friends certainly are not going to slow down immigration. They say they are. You hear them if they on the election trail on the and this is I showed this graph too. People have told me it's not just the Trump tweets about pushing back on Canada. It's not just about making Canada the 51st state. It's not just about pushing back against Trump. It's also the fact that Trudeau resigned. We already knew Trudeau was going to resign, but I guess on the moment that he resigned, Canadians became convinced that a person from his party with the exact same political agenda wouldn't do the same thing. So with a promise of reducing immigrants, the party responsible for the largest increase in immigration to this country that it's experienced in its recent history just got reelected. And we're expecting something. I don't know what Canadians are expecting to happen. I talked to them and their plan seems to be that they're going to resist Trump. They're going to flip him the bird. And then there's going to be some kind of revolution that will restore the 1990s, or I don't know what I think the 2000s was particularly good for Canada. The 1990s was like the high watermark of California. But we're going to restore the 2000s prosperity, and then we'll all live like happily ever after in our boomer mansions, having no identity other than our proclivity to consume retail products and our assured identity that we are not Americans, or at least not red state Americans. Yes, that's the plan. The thing is, people have I've been kind of critical of this. This is we're kind of dealing with two symmetrical problems. And that is, I do appreciate what Trump is trying to do. I do appreciate what he and JD Vance and Elon Musk are trying to bring to the table in terms of government reform. They're taking the steps that people have outlined in terms of actually attacking the cathedral and actually trying to wield power, and they're putting them into action. But the part they're missing is the vision of a world after the established order fades away, which is like, that's the one question that they haven't answered and that needs to be answered. Trump and Trump dominates news cycles by making mean tweets. That's what he does. And it works well for his brand, and it works well for his ability to outmaneuver his opponents. This is how he got into the presidency to begin with. But the problem is, as popular as this ostentatious way of using the internet to jujitsu the cathedral into a position of having to cover you, it also creates the appearance of a new regime that is totally destable and that doesn't have a vision for you if you're not directly an American. And so Americans are like, oh, sure, we can flip the bird to America, to Canada. Sure, we can threaten Europe and alienate them. We're nationalists. This is about America first. Yes, but this is not 1925. This is 2025. And in 2025, there is a global order. And people don't like the old order. People understand that the old order cannot persist. But nobody likes feeling unstable, and nobody likes being actively disrespected. So creating these ostentatious confrontations between different nationalities has this, I don't know. Again, who knows, right? Like, if I were part of the government proper and I was trying to create an alternative regime that would replace the one that currently rules us, I would be doing a lot of the things that the Trump administration is doing. But in some sense, the most important thing you can do as a new regime is to convince people that you are indeed another alternative, that you are indeed a better way forward for humanity, a new positive vision, a new hope, a new deal. This is what, this is what FDR did. FDR had all of these crazy programs. I mean, obviously he was in a better position because when FDR inherited the country in 1930, our sovereign debt was incredibly low. Our government was incredibly small. So to get rid of the old regime, he had to disband quite a few government programs, and he had an enormous leeway to borrow money to make new ones. And a lot of his ideas were zany and out there. A lot of them didn't work. He openly admitted this. And he had a lot of enemies. He completely, I mean, as brought up by Curtis Yarvin many times, FDR completely campaigned as somebody who was a reformist, someone who would restore the way things used to be. He governed as effectively a radical, as somebody who was going to create a new type of national socialism in America. A loaded word for sure, but a combination of nationalist principles and socialist principles that would be the effective new regime of America until current year. And to do this, he employed a variety of people that carried forward like a new vision of America. That this is why the fireside chats, like everyone who lives through this period, like they'll tell you about like, well, the president had these fireside chats on the radio, and everyone used to listen, and and they gave us hope. And I'm thinking, and I hear this from a variety of relatives, and I'm thinking, some of them actually had difficulty during the Depression, and some of them didn't. And I'm thinking, well, you weren't like in the poorhouse, right? You had a job, you had prospects, you even had property, which very few people did have. It was worth that much in San Francisco in the 30s. But you weren't like destitute looking for some savior. Like, why were you so tuned in to these fireside chats? Like, why were they warming your soul? Because they knew that America was being remade into something different. And what people want is, they say, like, in the new America, in the new world order, will there be a place for me? Trump is not explaining how there is a place for Canada in the new America First world order. Presumably there will be, but if they're going to be the 51st state, they're not feeling like they're super hyped about that. Neither would I, because 51st state sounds like they're going to be the butt monkeys of the new world order. This is not the great weakness of our enemies is that they have no vision for the future in which anyone seems like they have a place of pride or a reason to hope for their children. And Trump is completely dropping the ball on providing. I mean, J.D. Vance a little bit when he went to Europe, and he kind of endorsed the prospect of a political system that would actually be open to genuine forms of nationalism and border control. It seemed like he was tugging on a thread there. But what is the Wilsonian vision? Like, what is the equivalent of Woodrow Wilson's? Was it 16 points for how the world is going to operate? Or the FDR, he was dead at the time, but FDR's vision of the United Nations, like his State Department's vision of that, at least. Like, what is the vision of the international order that emerges out of the Trump administration's dissolution of, it's 14 points, yeah, dissolution of the old world? Nothing. It just feels like things are happening. It's really chaotic. It's really uncertain. And the market's moving around really quickly, and you better not be on the wrong side of this. This creates just this kind of like, I mean, it keeps Trump's enemies. This is I think his calculation. Trump is saying this and thinking, oh well, this kind of schizophrenic, the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off, the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off. This keeps my enemies off balance, and indeed it does. Democrats can't come up with a consistent narrative of how to fight the Trump administration for a variety of reasons, not least because they screwed the pooch in the previous Biden administration. But at the same time, nobody can come up into a Trump skeptical part of America and convince them that they're entering some kind of new vision of the country that they can feel genuinely like they have ownership over. And it creates a situation where people are looking for any reason to break away, to try to obtain their own separate peace, to try to disown their kind of understanding of counter progressivism. This is something that I kind of want to talk about. I didn't want to talk about this. I've talked about this for such a long time. I feel like I mention these people every single time there is a live stream. I have to mention the elite human capital people and their complete spurg out over the last year, which has been it's been incredibly embarrassing for people on the right wing, no matter where you fell, because it generated no new ideas and it generated a ton of drama. And the way the people behind this movement have behaved has been just, the most absolute, designed to cause the maximum amount of problems, the maximum amount of drama, for the absolute minimum amount of insight, the actual minimum amount of any kind of constructive dialogue. Now, I say this, and there's a high probability that I might be having a friendly dialogue with Nathan Kaufness in the future. But I'm thinking about the last time, screw it, let's just go through the story of how this happened. This is a ramble, so I'm rambling. How did this whole thing fall apart? Because previously, these kind of elite human capital, this is so cringe. It's the new atheist Brights one more time, but we have to call them the elite human capital people. They're so elite. They're so elite, guys. They're so intelligent. There's like nobody in the world that's smarter than Richard Hanania. There's never existed a man who as elite as Richard Hanania. I don't know what his degree is. I just have a PhD. I'm like this dumb dollar, but there's never been someone more elite than Alex Kashuta. There's never been anyone more elite than Nathan Kaufness. These people are experts in everything. They're experts in economics. They're experts in evolutionary psychology. They're experts in history. They're experts in law, and they can comment on it all. And if you don't agree with them, like you're like dumb, you're an idiot. You're a moron. And of course they don't. At least until recently, I have never seen Richard Hanania get into a contentious discussion with anybody. He does puff interviews with people like Brianna Wu, and he gets puff interviews from a variety of other people that are trying to edge into more right-wing ideas, but still want to countersignal people like Nick Fuentes. And Richard Hanania has put himself forward as essentially, let's be honest, as the anti-Nick Fuentes. That is Richard Hanania's brand, and that's the brand that other people like Nathan Kaufness and apparently Alex Kashuta have followed. What's so bizarre is for the longest time, these people were more or less just a segment of the right wing. We were talking about the same problems. We were talking about the issues with the universities, the systematic academic corruption, the problems endemic to the civil rights that was brought to the fore. But was it Christopher Caldwell? I think he was the original one that wrote Age of Entitlement. And of course, Hanania, genius that he was, writes the exact same book with slight modifications. And now he's the person that traced wokeness back to the civil rights movement. Man, just never let anyone tell you can't reinvent the wheels, kid, because you absolutely can reinvent the wheels. Yeah, you have right up there with Bill Gates buying DOS and then reselling it to IBM with slight modifications. Now you have the author of the thesis that civil rights led to wokeness being bought up by Richard Hanania and then flipped over for more notoriety and more profit and a higher seat at the table. And man, it's been a wild ride, because this whole thing started a year ago, right when I took my yearly fast from Twitter. Now, unlike this year, where Substack essentially just became Twitter when I was fasting from Twitter, this time last time when I fasted from Twitter, I was actually just out of the loop. I was more or less just doing my own thing. I was writing some Substacks. I was writing a speech for the Old Glory Conference, which I'm preparing to go to in another 2 weeks now. And I thought, oh, well, I left the internet and it was more or less the way I remember it. And then, Easter happens, a family tragedy starts rearing its head, on my family's side. And, obviously I'm preoccupied with my own stuff in that dimension too. And I come back to Twitter, and all of a sudden, people, like this group of people is just furious. Like, they're furious at me, at the entire right wing. A number of people who months before had been largely concerned with generating content that was essentially critical of the regime, critical of the old order of the 20th century. Now all they did was publish slop about how bad the right wing was. And how stupid the right wing was, and how you never should have right wingers in power. This is an election year. I mean, something happened. I mean, what happened? Did Trump finally gain the nomination? That's one theory. Did DeSantis drop out? Did they all have like personal experiences? Was it mean? But they're just furious. They're furious at the distant right, and like that's the word they've chosen. Like, the distant right is the most horrific group of degenerates ever. Well, the distant right is not a group of people. It never has been. And frankly, I'm one of the few people in the entire online space that has repeatedly used distant right as a brand for my own products. That's the label I've used. That's the people usually insofar as I'm notable in any regard, at least as far as YouTube went. When YouTube was the main platform for politics, I was kind of known as the dissident right guy. But now everyone's furious at the distant right, in particular Alex Kashuda. And we go through a year of this. This is my favorite podcast that she hosts. And for a year, essentially no new ideas are explored, except, I guess a few new ideas are explored. Like a few explorations of political controversies are explored. A few guests are entertained. But most weeks, the subject is why I hate the dissident right. To the point where I write an article called The Distant Right and Its Discontents, where I outline, I'm like, okay, you hate the dissident right, obviously. I think they mean, like, my original theory is, okay, you mean Nick Fuentes, not that the Groypers or Nick Fuentes have ever called themselves dissident right. They bash the label, and they think they're bashing people like me and Aaron McIntyre. Like, that's the people who usually are associated with the dissident right. But for a year, we have like this refrain. Every guest comes with a side order of why the right wing sucks for an entire year. No specifications. It gets to the point where Kashuda's podcast is essentially just platforming trolls. Like, they're platforming people that have come after me for, like, I write an article and I cite Daryl Cooper. And then this angry troll shows up saying, how dare you support Daryl Cooper? Don't you know he made this error in this section of his blog post? I'm like, I'm not Daryl Cooper. I was just giving his perspective on World War II as an example of demythologized history, a way to demythologize the history of the 20th century. A complete spurgout. The next week, he's on Kashuda bashing the dissident right. And, And what do you have? What is the problem? What is the problem? Well, initially, it's we're all stupid. Then the problem becomes that like the vibes are wrong. Our vibes are wrong. When we get to like when JD Vance becomes the nominee, it goes from the complaint about the dissident right goes from we're all idiots, mouth breathers who have low IQs, and it becomes we all have bad vibes and we're all incels, and we're all incels like JD Vance. Like JD Vance is the arch hose scare. He has bad vibes. He's such a yucky, gross incel freak. He's got a neck beard. He's got a circular head. We just can't be all around all these bad dissident right vibes. Okay, well then you have the JD Vance Tim Walz debate, and it's astoundingly obvious that JD Vance is for all his other flaws, for all his ideological commitments that could be misaligned, for all his debts to the PayPal mafia, which I do not necessarily trust, he is very well spoken and he has a very masculine persona when he's put on the spot, certainly in comparison to his mainstream alternative, Tim Walz. That disappears. So that disappears. And then it just becomes, Trump will never win. That becomes the new perspective. Trump will never win. That's the new, of course, Hanania, I think, hedges his best. Well, Trump will be better, but he'll never win. And it's a mixed bag. And then Trump wins. Fast forward to Trump's inauguration, and we have Kashuda and these people shifting again. Now now the problem is not that Trump won't win, because he did. Now the problem is not that Trump won't do anything. They tried that one for a few months too. Trump is going to be a reestablishment of the status quo. Now the problem is that Trump is vibe-based politics. It's funny. Initially, or it was, we can't be here because we're vibe driven. Now it's moved to you're vibe driven. It's completely now we're the people. And I don't vote. Not that I've ever cast a vote in a state where it would matter. So it's totally theoretical for me. It's just like I don't really like talking about electoral politics, but now my associations with the dissident right means that I'm just completely emotional and vibe-based. I don't deal with arguments or evidence. All I do is just like do Giga Chad memes, and then Trump picks them up and he puts them into policy. And that's what the dissident right is. The dissident right is totally meme-based politics. This is from a person who spent 3 years interviewing everybody on this scene, who's written articles and books and novels, and who's talking about historical figures and authors that are being resurrected, like Ernst Jünger, and my personal favorite, Joseph de Maistre. And is talking about Themistocles and all of these other dimensions of culture and knowledge. And we're talking about concepts in artificial intelligence and the consequences of technology and Deleuze and Guattari and all this stuff. After all of that time, after all of those interviews, there's nothing in the dissident right except for vibes and memes. And the real problem with the dissident right is tariffs. Nobody on the distant right, I mean, I'm not a big free trade person. I am incredibly skeptical of free trade. But nobody in the online sphere for the last 3 years has been talking about tariffs. Alex Kashida's idea, which she put into writing, was that Trump got the idea for tariffs from the online right. This is absolutely nuts. And I don't think even Alex Kashuda believes that. She wrote it. She made the accusation. She does not believe it. She does not believe it because I know she knows that Trump has been crazy about tariffs for 30 years, almost before the invention of the internet. And now it's somehow the online right's problem. It's the online right who put the idea of tariffs in his head. And not only that, the consequences of these tariffs are going to cause America to deindustrialize. All the factory workers are going to lose their jobs because of tariffs. The country is already deindustrialized. The economy is already collapsing. This has already occurred. Maybe tariffs will make it worse. I plead ignorance on this. And certainly, I think the idea of doing this Trump maneuver where he keeps everyone guessing what's going to happen is highly destabilizing to economic planning, which is known to have a very negative effect on markets overall. And I don't think it's a sign of good leadership. You know, I think being kind of schizophrenic on culture is a little bit more effective in that regard. But good or bad, tariffs do not come from the online right. They do not come from anyone online. They do not come from 4chan. And with some minor exceptions, they don't come from the online luminaries of the right. The only person I remember ever promoting tariffs was Pedro Gonzalez. I seem to remember him advocating for tariffs. But then a month ago, Alex appears on Pedro's podcast and gives this unhinged interview. It's one of the most it's a remarkable cultural artifact. And to this point, these people, you know, I guess I couldn't say Hanania. Hanania called me out as being, I can't remember this. Like he wrote a response article for my initial description of the elite human capital. I wrote this the New Secular Right article about 10 months ago, and Hanania was featured and explained why the New Secular Right or the elite human capital people aren't going to be able to accomplish their purposes. And Hanania writes this unhinged article where he accuses me of being like an anti-Semite. I didn't mention Jews in the article, but he accuses me of being part of an anti-Semitic radical wing of the right wing, and then delivers like it's almost like he didn't even read my article. He delivers this thing about how I haven't made any substantive critique of his policy, and it's no good to make policy nitpicks when we aren't aligned on first principle, and that was the whole point of my article. We weren't aligned on first principle. And that's the first principles of the elite human capital. That is where they're going to fall down. They're going to fall down because they do not have correct first principles. They do not have an understanding of what they believe or what they stand for. And as such, their broader project to fix the ills of the mainstream regime by reforming the edges of the economy will fall to pieces, because humans don't operate in facts and logic and checking. They operate under moral narratives. Moral narratives, not the management of facts, guide human politics. And if the moral narratives of the elite human capital people are incoherent garbage, which they are, they're going to get absolutely nowhere in their broader goal of creating an alternative. But other than like Richard Hanania, none of these new secular right people, when they call out the dissident right from being morons, ever mention anybody. Well, Alex gets on Pedro Gonzalez's podcast, and they just go nuts for like an hour and a half, denouncing everyone on the right, and they're really, really angry about tariffs because tariffs were in the news. And then names start coming up. Okay. Who are these horrible people who advocate for tariffs? We have raw egg nationalist. Raw egg nationalist. This is interesting. I never heard raw egg nationalist. I guess he wrote a tweet about tariffs. Fair enough. Why don't you have raw egg nationalist on to debate tariffs? Why don't you have a conversation? Why don't you productively engage in a discourse about what's effective economics? Certainly, our society has not classically considered economics to be outside the public discourse. It's not like you have to have a PhD to discuss economics, I guess. But I guess the new secular right or the elite human capital people disagree. You have to have a degree in economics to discuss economics, which I guess for this crowd means like I guess they have bachelor's degrees in economics. That's the idea. They're experts. I don't think they're PhDs. They're bachelor's and degrees in economics, and that means they're elite, and that means that they can judge a raw egg nationalist as a total degenerate, and they start going after this guy's personal life. It's just this unhinged thing where they attack him for being an incel, for living with his mother. They say incel, no. They attack him for living at home with his mother and never producing anything and only criticizing what he can't do himself and deliberately sabotaging the economy so that other people will suffer. Yeah, this is what rational podcasting sounds like. Personal attacks followed by insinuations of intentional malfeasance directed at people who've been kind enough to give you interviews in the past when they've been at the height of their popularity. This is what rational elite people do. And this refrain goes through the Pedro Gonzalez podcast. You can't hate them enough. You can't hate the dissident right enough. Again and again, he keeps on saying this. And I'm listening to this. This is completely unhinged. I assumed that raw egg nationalist had essentially insulted Kashuta or Pedro Gonzalez on Twitter, and this is like I was getting like the opposite end of a personal spat that was happening on this podcast. And ordinarily, like I wouldn't add. People are probably in the comments going, "Why are you dredging up this drama, Dave? Like, what this is exactly what you told us not to do. To take personal drama that was being aired on one podcast that was probably people's low point of their career and blow it up." And make it bigger by airing it on even a larger podcast. So now people aren't talking about ideas. People are now talking about the drama because it aired on Pedro's smaller podcast and now it's airing on my larger one. Why are you doing this? This is against your principles. Yeah, I am doing this because I'm not the only person that noticed this podcast. The other person who noticed this podcast was the New York fucking Times. I know I'm not supposed to care about the New York Times. I really know that I'm not supposed to care about what the New York Times says. I'm not supposed to care about what the New York Times says. Yeah, I fucking care about what the New York Times says. I really care about what the New York Times says. So now, this podcast, fresh with its personal attacks, which are to my knowledge, entirely unfounded and one-sided, is blasted out on the biggest megaphone on the planet. Why do I care about the New York Times says? Because everybody in my entire social circle in California is in a New York Times cinematic universe bubble. They are in the New York Times bubble. They're aware that I'm a right-winger. They am aware that I use the distant right to describe my ideas. They're vaguely aware of this circle. They're also aware of all of the ideas. Case in point, for the longest time, I've floated the very obvious idea that COVID-19 came from a lab in Wuhan. And every time I voiced this concern, I was called a conspiracy theorist and a kook and somebody who was totally unhinged online. I was a completely unhinged actor. How could you have a PhD and believe in this anti-science nonsense, David? How could you believe this? After everything we gave you for an education, you ruined it to become a conspiracy theorist who believes COVID-19 came out of a lab. And they condemned it, and they condemned it, and they condemned it, and they condemned it until it was printed in the New York Times, and then suddenly they do believe it. I shouldn't care about what's printed in the New York Times, but I fucking do. I know a lot about the New York Times. The other thing I know about the New York Times is they don't run stories with pull quotes until they do follow-up. Sure enough, Kashuda and others confirm that Michelle Goldberg, again, this horrible, I've known about Michelle Goldberg. She's a very dim woman. But she's been on the scene of the New York Times, and her one mission throughout her entire career is that conservatives are sociopathic pieces of shit. She reaches out to them to get confirmation to pull quotes from their podcast, and they endorse what they said. Did they offer any caveats? I've interviewed everyone in the dissident right for 3 years, and I don't condemn my guests. There are a lot of good people there. Anything like that before it runs in the New York Times? No. Just take the quotes you need and go to press with it. Now later on other podcasts or in articles, Pedro Gonzalez and Alex Kashuda, they throw people a bone with the not all right-wingers are like that. I don't condemn all of my interview guests. I guess you do condemn raw egg nationalists. That was incredibly clear on the podcast. It's incredibly clear that you condemn raw egg nationalists in highly personal ways that work. I don't know any other word to describe them other than unhinged. But it is what it is. So you condemn some of your podcast guests, not all of them. But I'm so glad that we got this correction after it ran in the New York Times and not ahead of it and nowhere near, And the problem is that everybody saw this coming a mile away. These people have been angry. I have no idea why. I have no idea why Richard Hanania is so pissed off. I have no idea why Kashuda is so pissed off. I have a guess as to why Pedro Gonzalez is really, really pissed off, but it's only a theory. But I've been trying to kind of talk these people in comments, obviously, but they can see it's me and they've talked to me before. And so I've been trying to talk these people down from this collision course, this catastrophe, for a year now, and pointed out the absolute essential necessity of when you have criticisms. If you're angry at Groypers or online trolls or Nick Fuentes, just say Nick Fuentes. If you're angry at Edward Dutton, just say Edward Dutton. The collectivization of the accusation means that it's maximally scandalous. It creates a problem for the most number of people. It throws more people under the bus. It creates public relations problems for more people, and it never gets to the point of ever discussing ideas. I've known that Kashuda has been angry at the right wing for 15 months now, roughly. And it took 12 months for her to come up with any kind of objection that was at all ideas-based, which eventually was tariffs. Well, I know it can't be tariffs because nobody was talking about tariffs in January of 2024. Nobody was. This is a complete manufactured issue from 2025. That's not what's actually going on. I don't know. There's probably no way to resolve this. Again, people are like, you have to cover this. Oh, I'll cover it. Whatever. This has been covered. This is probably the last time we'll hear about these people. Well, not exactly. We talk about discourse, and it was apparent to me, at least, that the real motivation for these people moving away from the dissident right is that they wanted to establish themselves as the new acceptable opposition to the mainstream government. The mainstream government is, progressive, is globalist. And here is your little, this is your acceptable measure of dissent. Your acceptable measure of dissent is Richard Hanania. And people buy this. A lot of young guys, it seems they buy Richard Hanania's shtick. Now, Richard Hanania, again, for the longest time, he was just a right winger that was a little bit more secular than usual. He was just a right winger that was a little more secular than usual. And then he gets on this like Nietzschean, people. I talked to Richard and Hanania fans, and invariably they describe him as like a person with very, very high epistemological standards. He identified my article about him that never mentioned the Jews as an example of like anti-Semitic discourse. So I don't know if his epistemic standards are like too high, right? But he has very high epistemic standards, and he's very principled. He's very principled. And I ask Richard Hanania fans, like, okay, he's principled. You know, this guy is made up of contradictions. One week he tells me that the media is horrible and it's defaming him, which it did try to get him fired for being an old Richard Spencer fanboy, for being an old alt writer. And he screams bloody murder about the media. The next month, he's writing an article that says the media they're just good truth tellers. On most subjects, they're absolutely accurate. On most subjects, they're absolutely accurate. Sure, that doesn't make any sense. Then he tells me that politics is all about coalitions, and immigration causes more diversity and more ethnic coalitions. And this is going to create a fractured polity that's going to be at each other's throat. But no, it's a good thing. We need more immigrants because it's going to power the economy. Because we need more cheap labor. But then in the next article, he tells me that AI is going to, AI and robotics are going to replace the need for all cheap labor. And there's no problem with the competency crisis. And then he tells me in one article that women's tiers always win in the marketplace of ideas, but that we should be governed by a marketplace of ideas run primarily through the female-dominated universities. This is an incoherent mess. So we're doing. He's recommending policies that he knows are going to crater social cohesion, that he knows are going to depress working class wages, that he knows are going to dispossess the middle class of houses, that he knows are going to create mass misery due to a crisis of meaning and happiness and cohesion in family relationships. And he also knows that the media lies, but he's still going to promote the media and try to be their friends. And I say, geez, guys, I know you like Richard Hanania. I don't. What principles are you talking about? Like what is this moral lodestone? And they're like, oh no. Get this. He's a principled Nietzschean liberal. He's a principled Nietzschean liberal. Like this is just his ethics system. Like he wants the working class to be miserable so he can accelerate technology maximally and increase the GDP, because all he cares about is having a higher GDP and more technology, because he's Nietzschean. Because he's Nietzschean, sometimes evil is good. And so all of the problems he's advocating for, like they're not contradictions. He's just causing people to be miserable so that he could be more elite. He's doing stupid things and evil things to be. This is not what Richard Hanania says. This is Richard Hanania's fans explaining his appeal to me. I'm doing stupid and evil things so that I can be elite human capital more and better. Yeah. I mean, other than it's a little bit wacky. Okay, this is a little bit wacky, but I mean, okay, so maybe this is fine. None of the things I mentioned is if he's setting out to do evil as his objective to be more Nietzschean, then it's technically he doesn't contradict himself. Like Okay, but and maybe that's what happened. He was sitting under the Bodhi tree meditating, Richard Hanania, and then an apple hit him on the head, and like he suddenly gained an insight that we need more human misery so that we can be like the Nietzschean Superman, and nobody looks more like a Nietzschean Superman than Richard Hanania. Dude, that guy is ripped. He's a fucking Adonis. You see? Oh my god! Like, talk about who fucking needs Giga Chad when you have Richard Hanania. It's quite intimidating to be both in his intellectual and physical presence. It's just out of control how masculine and the Chan Superman that is. Yeah, maybe he read Julius Evola and Ayn Rand and took mescaline, and not so dissimilar from Michel Foucault and the coast of California where I was just visiting. And then afterwards, he came up with this weird demonic fusion between capitalist cyberpunk dystopia and Evolian heroism. Yeah, but the better explanation is that he wanted to write a set of provocative articles while still signaling to his funding class that he was on their side politically. And that all of these people from Coffness to Hanania, and I'll get to Coffness a little bit later, to Coffness to Hanania to Alex, their journey does not make any sense as an organic intellectual development. It makes all the sense in the world as a development of self-interest, as a belief that they do not want to be associated with people that they assume are low status, not because they don't think we have the adequate number of degrees, and certainly not because any of us talked about tariffs. If I ever talked about tariffs, but because it didn't look good for the social circles they were in. Before this podcast, everyone waiting was like, oh, I can't wait for Dave to talk more about the death of discourse. That's what we talk about every week, right? I always talk about the death of discourse. And it's dead. But is it entirely? When I was on my Twitter fast, I think this is the last week. Maybe I'm misremembering this. Was this just a week ago? I can't remember. This is the Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray debate. People DM me, Dave, you gotta see this debate. It's Joe Rogan. Okay, great. I mean, I know people like Joe Rogan, and God love him. He's entertaining, kind of. He's never been my thing. He's too stoner vibed. He's too laid back, and it's not pointed enough for me. And I can't. And I'm not a big Dave Smith fan either, and I certainly don't like Douglas Murray. And Douglas Murray is a neocon, and I know Aaron pointed this out, but people think that's an insult. Like, oh, he's just a neocon. And he literally wrote a book called Neoconservatism, The Case For. So this guy is like the neocon. This is the primordial. This is not case zero, obviously. Those are the Trotskyists from NYU back in the 70s. But they're having a debate on Joe Rogan. I'm like, these are people DM me this debate. I'm like, can't think of anything that's more boring. I put it on for 5 seconds. I'm like, this is the most boring thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Dave Smith is not making good points. I mean, he's seeming reasonable. Douglas Murray certainly isn't. I can't believe I'm watching it. I tried to sit through the podcast 3 times. I don't know what it is about this podcast, but this just kicked off a firestorm. This kicked off a firestorm on social media. And on 2 fronts. I mean, the neocons believe that they should be in charge. Donald Trump is the president. He's not anti-Israel. He's not nearly as isolationist as I would want him to be. And although he's trying to draw down the Ukrainian war, which was obviously a neocon project, he is not so nearly against the neocon philosophy, and neocons will take a loss in a foreign conflict, as they have done many, 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 many times over the last 4, 5, 8, 10, 20 years. As long as the people who are losing the foreign conflict for them, or creating a ceasefire, essentially fluff their philosophy, give them credit, assure them that their logic of the world is more or less still in effect for the people who are making the big decisions at the highest level. Fair enough. So they, in this moment, believe, and many in the Daily Wire believe, that this is going to be a return to normalcy. And the biggest sticking point for the neocons is, of course, the war in Israel. Do they care about the consequence of the war with Israel? Not really. Do they care about war with Iran? Sure, a lot of them would like it, and a lot of them are lobbying for it. But once again, it's not so much the war outcome than it is the belief of the ruling class. But they care deeply, deeply, deeply that you think Israel is the good guy and Hamas is the bad guy. That is the most important thing. There cannot be any actors. Like, you could say that the war is bad, it's not worth the cost. You could say that we don't want America involved in another Middle Eastern war against Iran. But because neocons understand that humans are not just fact processing machines, we are not just policy calculating wonks, we operate on moral narratives. And the thing that they care about the most is making sure that Israel is always considered the good guy and its enemies are always considered the bad guy, no matter what our conclusions come in after that. And so every single person who's surrounding this, like Jordan Peterson and James Lindsay, and obviously Douglas Murray, and the rest of these more normie National Review crowd, they see this interview and they go absolutely apoplectic. It's like this Rashomon moment. They all think Murray won. And everyone else on the distance Ferris thinks that Dave Smith won. And Dave Smith isn't even really a right winger. He's just more or less this independent thinker that's trying to grapple with the situation, is kind of making his own calls, calling balls. And I genuinely think he's just emotionally reacting to the news as he sees it. And and I listen, and I definitely, if I were to like vibe check them, warning Alex, shoot, I'm operating on vibes. I would definitely sympathize with David Smith. He's talking more like a human being. But everyone in the conservative sphere, like this boring debate, I am a debate fan. I can't get through this debate. It's too boring. But they're enraged by this, and they all come out storming. The next week, everyone is counter-signaling the online right. Like Alex Kashuta was just like for the previous year, like Pedro Gonzalez was for the previous 2 years, like Richard Hanania was for the previous year and a half. They're all coming out strong against the right wing now. Well, for some reason, what happened? What happened? There is an anti-Israel moral narrative that appears to be somewhat sympathetic, that is very, very hard to answer. As far as I can figure out, the thing that everyone is reacting to, this is the article that I came across the other day from Nathan Kaufness, and I really reacted negatively to this article. This was an article written by Nathan Kaufness, the fourth horseman of the elite human capital apocalypse, let's call him. Certainly, he has the Superman physiognomy that I come to expect. That he's just so elite. Although, truth be told, he does have a PhD, so I guess academically, at least, there's a case for it. And I can't, uh, he can't quite measure up to all of those BAs in economics, but he'll have to make do with the PhD in, what was it, philosophy of science and an MA in genetics or something like that, right? He'll have to make do with that. But regardless, he is very upset about the Dave Smith thing. And as far as I can figure, the one actually interesting part of the debate is this question over expertise. Now, Murray is of the belief that Dave Smith should not have, he should not, it's unclear, right? Because the insinuation by Murray is that somehow Dave Smith's takes on Israel versus Palestine are illegitimate because he is not an expert in history or in politics. Or maybe he's not an expert because he hasn't physically been to the country. It's unclear, it keeps on changing, but the insinuation is that unless you're an expert, you shouldn't have your opinion platformed. But the problem is that Murray can't define what the threshold is for expertise. Are all wars totally out of bounds for people who have never been to the country where the war occurred? Well, that rules out almost all academics who write about war professionally. How many people who talked about the Iraq War, either in the negative or positive, had ever been to Mesopotamia? Is it about having PhDs in history, or do you need PhDs in history and anthropology and archaeology and political science? I mean, who has 5 PhDs to be an expert in anything? Murray balks at that. And so it's this, most people cite that as the absolute low point. They say that Murray, again, I didn't watch all of this because I couldn't get through it without falling asleep. I definitely listened to the part I just described to you. Murray can't consistently define what expertise means, but he says over and over again that expertise is needed. And that's the hill that the elite human capital seems to be dying on. In fact, a lot of people from the Jordan Peterson, James Lindsay side, to the National Review side, to the more classic neocons, to our friends on the elite human capital like Kashuda and Kofnis and Hanania, they're all convinced you shouldn't be able to have an opinion unless you're an expert. This is a war on it's a war on experts, guys. It's a war on science. This is the new war on science. The original war on science was waged by people who didn't like gay marriage and abortion. I remember the war on science. I was an atheist. I was a new atheist in 2004. And the people who hated science in 2004 were those damn pro-lifers and their idea that fetuses were babies. They were anti-science. They're anti-science. We had to crush them for being anti-science. That they would destroy our science if people thought the fetuses were babies. But there's a new war on science. A new, not just science, a war on expertise itself. Now Kofnis is on the case. He's very concerned that we have a problem with our faith in experts. Read this article. I can see that he's taking Murray's side, but then he goes on this digression about COVID and all of the manifest lies that were put together by the World Health Organizations and Dr. Fauci and the variety of other NGOs that essentially ran the pandemic and caused untold harm, not least of the fact because these very same organizations literally created the conditions that created the virus that killed millions and then covered it up for years and years and years and called everyone who disagreed with them horrible names and had their credentials called into question and had them insulted at their families' dinner parties and had them run down in the New York Times and had people questioning their sanity and thoughtfulness when they were just pointing to facts, Coffness documents it all, and very, very well. Admitted this is a major failing of the experts, the greatest scandal we ever have had among experts. But have we taken the wrong lessons from this? Is it a problem with expertise itself? Coffness asks. Not at all. You see, the scientists, like Dr. Fauci, like the people at the CDC, like the World Health Organizations, they're all people. They're all fallible human beings, and human beings lie. So expertise still works. And, Coffness says this. He says, the experts, science still works, the expertise still works, the labs still work. They got the right results. They just lied about it. It's not an error in the expertise. They just lied about it for 5 years and covered it up. This is such... Coffness offered to come on the podcast and explain this sentiment. Human fallibility and lying is not a sufficient explanation for a failure of this magnitude. First off, and I illustrated this in an example, lying is worse than an error. Lying is worse than being incompetent for a truth-telling system. So I told this to Coffness. I said, Coffness, pretend you're at a lab. You've published papers. I've published papers. Pretend one of your papers gets published. It has an error in it. Like your lab produces this. It gets fed back by a reviewer. It's caused some professional disaster. And so your lab has to put out a statement. What statement? What are you angling for when this untruth is published? Is the angle you're going for, I'm sorry, guys, we're behind on our training. We misadded the numbers. We had a bug in our code. It was an honest mistake. We made a mistake. We had a bug. Maybe one or two of the lab technicians isn't quite the brightest bulb in the batch, and this is an honest mistake. That's one story you could go with. That might cover your ass. But this is another story you could go with. Like, yeah, we're competent. We know what we're doing. We just fucking lied to you. We fucking lied to you with the intention of deceiving your audience. And we would do it again. And we will do it again. Because we have more loyalty to our political principles and financial interests than we do have to telling the truth. Which one of those cases is like the worst case scenario? It's obviously, if that happened in a lab, like if the first case, an honest mistake, they misadded the numbers, it happens. Okay, I mean, it shouldn't happen all the time, but it does happen all the time. Let's be honest, right? A lot of bad facts get published there. Most of them are mistakes, especially in the era of computer bugs, and untruths happen. Probably no one loses their job. Probably not even the technician that screwed up loses their job. It's just a mistake. It's the cost of doing business. If it gets out there that you lied intentionally to deceive an audience, that is a scandal of the century. Case in point, when they bring you through the PhD programs and they have you publish papers, they always tell you about the story of the cold fusion people. This is in the 70s, where a group of people had a chemical reaction that looked like cold fusion. And it was unfortunately not replicable. But they got through a peer review because they passed it through a bunch of their friends who didn't require a follow-up experiment, who didn't question results that looked like they were questionable. And so this major result got published. And because there were actions on the part of the people who published this cold fusion paper, obviously inaccurately, because they intentionally tried to stack the review in their favor, this was considered deception. And because it was deception, you as opposed to being a mistake, if it was a mistake, you would never hear about this again. It would be, oh yeah, you misadded a number, you mix up the test tubes. Because it was seen as deception, even though I don't think it was entirely deception, they went for softballs, but I think they genuinely thought that they had discovered something. They were just being lazy and stupid. But because it was seen as deception, this mistake is notorious across all scientific disciplines and is used as an example to scare graduates in academic abuse, graduate students, when they're being taught about academic abuse. This COVID scandal with the lab leak is thousands of times worse than that. Thousands of times worse than that. And on top of this, you have scandals having to do with the suppression of human biodiversity information, the suppression of countervailing facts on global warming, which is pretty damn obvious. You remember ClimateGate? The infiltration of activist academics into climate science. You have, the transgenderism stuff alone, you have the entire medical establishment essentially doubling down on hormone blockers for children, and in sometimes surgeries, as you see from major medical establishments, with very little evidence that these things, with evidence that these things are not reversible, selling them as reversible treatments, and with very, very little evidence that they have any psychological benefit, which they're being sold as having psychological benefits for children, even though the exact opposite seems to be the case from the studies that we see coming out of Europe. You have, and Kaufman is certainly aware of the large attempt to suppress the facts regarding human biodiversity, the differential intelligence and genetics in between different racial demographic groups that occur statistically. We know these are abuses. We've known about them for decades. And they keep on getting suppressed. Up until the point, everyone knew this was true, up until the point where we're canceling James Watson, the founder of DNA. I know he got it given back to him. We're forcing him to sell his Nobel Prize. We're disgracing him publicly before, when he's almost on his deathbed, the poor guy. Because he said a truth about genetics, for which he is most certainly an expert. This is a major problem. And and these are not mistakes. These are lies. These are intentional attempts to deceive the public that are being perpetrated collectively, and everyone's covering for each other. This is not something that can be chalked up to human error, and this is way, way worse than mistakes. But Kaufman's point in this article is that the expert class actually isn't so bad when you compare them to Joe Rogan. I didn't think Joe Rogan was competing with Johns Hopkins Medical and Harvard Medical for his position. I thought Joe Rogan was the successor to Jon Stewart. That was his demo. That was he's essentially the replacement for Jon Stewart, for a certain type of younger man who wants to have infotainment. Now, we could talk about infotainment and its rise in the 1990s and 2000s as being a problem. Perhaps Walter Cronkite was better before them. But Joe Rogan is not the near equivalent of the medical establishment. But this is the real thing. The one thing worse than an expert is a non-expert. The problem is not the systematic lies. The problem is the unsystematic mistakes of Joe Rogan and the people he has on this podcast. It's, as Kaufman puts it, it shouldn't be the purview of people to debate things in public that are the purview of experts. He says, as is the refuge of all science worshippers, they always bring up particle physics. We discovered an exoplanet, and Candace Owens is questioning it. And look at all the great things physics is done. I don't debate the Higgs boson on my show. I don't debate M-brain theory on NBC Nightly News. And because I don't debate the existence of Higgs boson or exoplanets or M-brain theory or multiverse theory, it shouldn't be legal to question Israel's conduct of a highly controversial war. Fuck me. Or it shouldn't be legal, or it shouldn't be allowed. It shouldn't be. The system should prevent. Kaufman makes this very clear. It should not. Rogan, we cannot just rely on Joe Rogan to not have these debates. We have to have some systematic barrier to stop Joe Rogan from having these conversations. And these conversations include debating climate change, debating trade policy, and debating Israel. And he says, he says the same things I do. He has these like little caveats where like he tries to get ahead of the criticisms. It's like, I know that like all this would require an impossible amount of expertise. He says the same thing I do. Look, what are you supposed to say? What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to have a PhD in 4 topics for the privilege of discussing Israel, like a PhD in archaeology, history, whatever? It's like, of course you're not, right? Of course you have to be able to discuss it, but you have to have a minimal command of the facts. You have to have a minimal command of the facts. And because Joe Rogan made a factual error here, he's not minimally competent. He's not minimally, but who is? Who hasn't made a mistake? I'm just looking at Douglas Murray, who presumably Kaufman thinks is the expert in this debate. If not, who is? Who is the expert? Apparently it's Murray. Apparently it's Douglas Murray. He is the expert in Israel-Palestine relations that meets Kaufman's standards. I'm just looking at the criticism that I say just from my Twitter feed since I've been back on Twitter for the last week and a half or so. I mean, it's just full of people finding factual inaccuracies in Douglas Murray's reporting on Israel. And guess what? It all cuts in Israel's favor. You can just document the errors. They're just there. People have come up with entire Twitter threads of the mistakes he's made. But Joe Rogan has to be held to a higher standard. Why? Well, we don't know why. It's because he does not have expert Buddha nature. He does not have, Douglas Murray has elite human capitalist Buddha nature, and Joe Rogan doesn't. And Richard Hanania has elite human capital Buddha nature, and Dave Smith doesn't. The people who've been crafting defenses of tariffs who have PhDs in economics, they're not experts, but Alex Kshuda is. Or simultaneously, I guess the idea is that Kaufman floats this idea. Okay. Well, you don't have to be an expert to talk about the subject, but you have to be an expert to go against the expert consensus. Oh, okay. So everyone can talk about the subject as long as they all pull in the direction of the consensus that already exists in the academy. Yeah. But you don't do that, Nathan Kaufman. You're a heterodox thinker. Do you remember that? Well, no, HBD. HBD is being suppressed through dishonesty. Yeah, but how do I know that? How do anybody know that? All of these topics have a political dimension to them. You don't think Israel is suppressing information that makes it look bad? You don't think that Douglas Murray is being biased intentionally in favor of Israel? That he's not operating under the same biased worldview that leads all the anthropology department to go against human biodiversity? When I was first introduced to human biodiversity, everyone knows I come from a college town. I'm not going to say which town it was, right? But like my friends, like my father was a very heterodox thinker, and he had the bell curve in the house, and I read it as an edgy teenager, and I mentioned it to someone from the anthropology department, and they say, "Oh no, that's Charles Murray. That's Richard Hurd. It's all bunk. It's all bunk. This is a cultural anthropologist, right? It's a cultural anthropologist. He had no expertise in this, but everyone in cultural anthropology knows that this stuff is bunk. It's been refuted. It's all social constructions. That's the expert opinion. Is Charles Murray a professor at a accredited university in cultural anthropology? I guess he's not. And all my friends' fathers are, so I guess this is bunk, right? Okay, but no, Coffness corrects him. Some fields are bullshit. Okay, so anthropology is bullshit, I guess, right? I guess population genetics isn't bullshit, but there are tons of people in population genetics that condemn HBD on ideological grounds. There's no way from the outside to know that the condemnation is on ideological grounds and not data-based ones, because they all claim that their condemnations come from factual grounds. So from the outside, it looks like all the colleagues in population genetics are condemning you. Okay, so the only way to know that the heterodox opinion is correct is to know intimately that field, which I can't do as a layperson. But that's not bullshit. Okay, physics is obviously not bullshit. And I used to think that chemistry and microbiology wasn't bullshit and medical sciences were hard science. But I just had 5 years of virtually every professional in these fields lying about the most impactful thing that has happened biomedically in my entire life for 5 years, and suppressing that information with the coordination and cooperation of the mainstream media. Does that sound like a hard science to you? That's fucking bullshit. I'm getting passionate about this. I know I'm going to talk to Coffness, and I better tone this down, otherwise I'm going to tear the kid's head off, right? But I will tone this down, absolutely. But like, okay, so that's bullshit, right? So we have physics is not bullshit. Biomedical sciences lie to us extensively. Population genetics isn't bullshit. It's a hard science, but half the professionals lie anyway because they're politically motivated. You have to take Nathan Coffness's word for that. And also anthropology is bullshit. And then we have I thought anthropology was more hard than economics and political science, but Coffness says no, like economics is hard science. And so is political science. Like political science and economics are hard science. You have to have experts in these fields. Like you can have an uninformed opinion about cultural anthropology and talk about it as a layperson, as Nathan Coffness does, but you can't have an opinion about terrorists, and you can't have an opinion about Israel. I guess this was unclear. I'm assuming that this is the case. This is the implications, because he's talking about Dave Smith's conversation with Douglas Murray in his Joe Rogan appearance. This is the title card. This is the case about why Joe Rogan, screwed the pooch by allowing this debate to occur, where a non-expert David Smith was allowed to cast aspersions on the justness of Israel's war. Okay, so we've admitted that a broad swath of the academy, including many of the hard sciences, are systematically lying to us for political purposes and cannot reliably be counted on to give a consensus take on an opinion, because I can put together a consensus of scientists that condemn HBD, Nathan Coffness, and they can, because it's literally been used against you at multiple occasions. I can come up with, there's massive scientific abuse going on throughout the harder sciences. But when we get to the dismal science of economics, which is notoriously unreliable, and literal wars that are going on right now, you have to have an expert to have an opinion on a war, because it's so, political science in war situations that are currently ongoing are so reliable. The motivations of world leaders, historically speaking, this is hard science. You can't speculate that Winston Churchill had alternative motives in World War II. That's an expert's call. There's no way that people relitigate the motivations of the American Civil War or Hitler's motivations in going to war in Eastern Europe. There's no controversy there. This is an expert consensus. The motivations of Israel are something governed by experts. There's no such thing as fog of war. I used to think that the fog of war is a real thing. People don't even understand what's going on inside wars when they're literally on the battlefield. It's a complete breakdown of information. And governments notoriously lie about their motivations for going to war. That is the most politically motivated thing of all time. What the hell is Kaufmann talking about? Okay, insulate hard sciences from debate. Physics, no debate on physics. Okay, kind of. I still want people who do not use the same credentialing system and the same funding system making decisions about physics experiments for the same reason that I want non-credentialed chemists and people who are out of the loop on the funding mechanisms to decide how we manage lab safety over biomedical stuff for obvious fucking reasons. But maybe I'll grant that debate over the Higgs boson is not proper on the Joe Rogan show. But you won't debate about the Higgs boson on the Joe Rogan show because the Joe Rogan show only holds debates over subject matter that are politically controversial. And the one lesson I have seen again and again about academic bias is that when there's an argument, when there's a conversation inside an academic community between truth and politics, politics wins 100% of the time in my entire life. The only way that truth gets out is because of politics, because politics is absent or because politics compels the truth to be known. Case in point, Nathan Kaufmann wants to have the debate over these things be left up to the academics. His case in point is, oh, well, with the lab leak theory, the real heroes of the lab leak theory are all of these scientists. He lists a few of them in his articles. I tried to speak out against the consensus and make their voices heard. Yeah, Nathan. The writing was on the wall about the lab leak theory in late 2020. Roughly late 2020, before the election. So why internally did the truth not win out? How did truth come out about the lab leak theory? The truth came out about the lab leak theory. It didn't change in terms of scientists. Like the internal discussion did not drive the disclosures. Politics drove the disclosures. The establishment tested the water about owning up to the lab leak theory after they got Trump off the scene in January 6th. They thought they'd never have to deal with Trump again. Maybe we could bite the bullet on this. So they let a few people share their opinions and they unban conversations on certain select social medias. Then they get embarrassed and they pull back and they condemn everyone as conspiracy theorists again for another 4 years. Then when Trump wins again and they realize that they can't possibly keep it under wraps, they come out and say, oh, we lied. We lied for 5 years and called you conspiracy theorists and suppressed the information about a scientific scandal that killed millions of people, and robbed years of life away from the young and shattered our social systems and shattered our educational systems, ruined friendships, and it was lies. It was lies. Scientists did not drive that process. Politics drove that process. If Trump hadn't gotten elected, they would have sat on that shit for decades before they admitted it. They would have admitted it on their deathbeds. It would have been 30 years if they could get away with it before they admitted that that was true. Truth came out because of politics driven by people who largely weren't experts. Nathan Kaufmann needs to give me one really good answer to his entire career. This is why I said this article is so embarrassing. Why the fuck are you on Substack, Nathan Kaufmann? I'm getting heated. I will try to be nicer when I have him on. And I'm usually a very nice interview. Why the fuck are you on Substack? You're a scientist. You have a PhD in philosophy of science and population genetics. You tell me that the truth comes out strictly inside conversations between experts, and then it goes to the press. That is the mechanism for doing it. Why are you doing an end run around this? All your readers don't have PhDs in population genetics and the philosophy of science. They can't double check your work. They're not is Substack a peer review? Are you getting revision comments back when you hit the publish button on your blog? Is that what's going on? Is that what you think this is? You're going to the public so that you can try to politically turn the tide, because you know as well as I do that the establishment will deny all the facts that are politically inconvenient to them until the second where they're forced not to. If that is the case, the conversation cannot be left up to experts, because all will happen is that the experts will get suppressed. That's why Steven Pinker and Charles Murray came clean about human biodiversity in like 1999, and then 15 fucking years later, we decided to cancel the father of genetic science, James Watson. Fuck this shit. Why the hell are we doing this? Why the hell are we doing anything? Justify the elite human capital people. Justify your existence to me. Justify your existence in doing anything. I'm so angry at these people. Can these people think for themselves? Go back to your labs. If the idea is to suppress conversation, human beings do not make decisions based on facts. They do not make decisions based on peer review. The whole point of peer review is not to be reviewed by experts, but to be reviewed by people who, in an ideal situation, are not politically aligned to you. I'm going to tell you guys this story. Hopefully, this is edifying. Hopefully, I'm teaching you something, because my head's about to explode in absolute rage. The first time I published a paper in my PhD, I think I published a few papers before my master's degree, but I wasn't first author on them, right? Okay, so I have my paper, went to my advisor. We submit the paper to the journal, and you get the paper back. I hate this feeling. You get the paper back, and it's full of comments, like the whole thing. Like if you print, like, everything is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. I need more of this. I need more of that. What does this even mean? It's full of comments. I mean, you spent months trying to put this together, even longer doing the research, and you just see it, and you question your life. I mean, you need something to get you out of this ditch that you are when you see your paper come back with comments, and they feel cutting. They feel like they're questioning your existence, your ability to operate in this field as an expert. And okay, so I get depressed. I read the comments, and I go to my advisor and I say, originally, I thought that I was being reviewed by experts who knew more than me. But I'm reading these comments, and it's very apparent that the people who are reviewing the research I spent months on don't even know the subject matter as well as I do as a graduate student who hasn't even passed their general exams yet. So what am I being done? I know more than the reviewer does. I'm a bigger expert on this subfield than he is. He hasn't even read the first book on this that I cited in my introduction. And I have spent the first 2 years of my graduate degree researching this stuff. Why is he? Can I make a complaint to the editor to get a better person to review me who actually knows this stuff? My advisor says, David, that's not the point of peer review. The people who review our stuff never know as much about our work as we do. We're researching this. Of course we know more about it than they do. The whole point is that they're curious and they have the ability to learn. They are one of our readers. They can be taught. And they're detached from our interests. It's in our interest to publish this paper. It's in their interests to debunk them, to push back, even in their ignorance. And we have to convince them. Our task is to convince them, even in their ignorance, that our research is valuable and accurate. And in many ways, the fact that they don't know anything about our research makes it better. We have to be the teachers, she told me. A life's lesson, you have to be the teachers. It's the detachment of the reviewer. It's the separation from the status hierarchy that you are participating in as a grad student or as a scientist that makes peer review possible, not the expertise in the science itself. Peer reviewers rarely have expertise in what they're reviewing, but they have the ability to learn. That's what makes them the reviewers. That's what makes them adequate reviewers. And in your attempt to explain and convince your paper is stronger. That's the whole idea of academics. In Kaufman's world, dialectics is truly dead. We destroy it so that we can worship experts even more. I don't know what he hopes to achieve by this. It's self-defeating. It's like he's Wile E. Coyote who set a trap and then walks right into it. The whole point is to be convinced of something, to teach. Look, I hate democracy too. Maybe we make certain subjects only the purview of a certain elite subset. The debates that elite subset has will not be governed by who has the most expertise. It will be governed by teaching and convincing and facts and logic and arguments. Something that these elite human capital, for all their pretensions to be elite, are very, very poor at delivering. Furthermore, to the extent that this intersects with politics, we will essentially either destroy democracy entirely or decide to have a public conversation. If war and economics are so guarded by expertise that you can't even hold an opinion on them or express it unless you have a sign-off from professionals, then we should basically just disband democracy, absolutely, and be ruled by technocrats, which is probably what these elite human capital types want. I think Alex Kishida did say something like that, but I doubt she'd stand by it. I doubt she'd stand by it because her brand is liberal democracy, because our political formula, our propaganda is liberal democracy, even though they obviously don't believe it. It's obvious that when we got rid of tariffs with NAFTA in the 90s, I remember this, it's very obvious that all of the economic predictions we made were inaccurate. But it doesn't matter that we failed our predictions. The experts still get to keep their jobs. It doesn't matter that the experts lied. The real problem is not that the academic establishment lied for 5 years and got millions of people killed and continues to lie about any numbers of sociology, including the subjects that Kaufman talks about. The problem is slop meme culture online, which is principally exhibited by Joe Rogan because he hosts open-ended debates between two people who are not experts on a subject matter that no one could possibly be an expert on. Kaufman knows this is a dead end. Hanania knows this is a dead end. This is the Pinker problem. Pinker came clean about this stuff. He didn't change any minds. All he did was purchase himself a role as America's #1 dissident thinker who didn't do anything that was dissident because he didn't want to ruffle feathers. So you had Pinker support the dissident party indefinitely, creating all sorts of racial laws and disparate impact standards, as was done all throughout the Obama administration, which Pinker supported. All the while, you knew that this was in reaction to a physical statistical reality that could not possibly be changed by social conditioning. Throw your children to the wolves, fucker. I mean, throw your children to the wolves. What do people who have children think about this? To get a higher position, to get a comfy sinecure, you set up your society for a disaster that will get everyone like you canceled in the future when the next generation is taught that this is villainous and wrong. But you keep on doubling down? The problem is that this is not going anywhere. It can't. I know what, I really hope this is the last time I ever talk about Alex Kashida on this podcast. But I know what she's imagining. Okay. So maybe the right wing has some points. But the right wing is filled with sociopathic people. Probably some of them have come after me and insulted me personally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to denounce the right wing while still maintaining my independence, my autonomy as an independent thinker. Like, this is the plan. The right wing have stepped in it. They're going to create a fiasco. Trump got elected. And I'm responsible. So I'm going to confess. I'm going to make a big public confession. I'm going to get it published in the New York Times. And then I'm going to be the new face of the opposition. To be the face of the opposition with a conscience. This is not the first time I've dealt with this problem or this delusion. And it is a delusion. Because I know exactly how it ends. When I saw the Michelle Goldberg, the vibe shifts against the right, immediately I had this flashback to this other character called Faraday Speaks, who wrote a very similar article. How I was tricked by it wasn't the distant right there, it was the alt-right rabbit hole. I got tricked by Stefan Molyneux. And by memes. It was the memes. I was brainwashed by memes. This character called Faraday Speaks creates a video talking about how he was brainwashed by Stephen Molyneux and memes into becoming an alt-righter. He says, I was almost tricked into becoming an evangelical Christian and a traddy. And I almost got married to an evangelical. But then I had a pang of conscience. I saw the Charlottesville protests with the tiki torches, and I knew the right thing had to be done. And I needed to take the brave move and denounce Richard Spencer to the New York Times, because there's nothing the New York Times would hate more than to print bad things about Richard Spencer. Immediately, when this guy came on the scene, all of the right-wingers were crying, Fed, 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 at the top of their lungs. This guy looked so convenient, and his story was not particularly convincing. At the time, I had myself been a critic of Richard Spencer. I did this series called What's Wrong with the Alt-Right, parentheses, that isn't race, where I tried to advance the idea that a spiritual perspective was needed rather than a racial one. And so I reach out to Faraday Speaks, and we kind of become a friend. Like, I joined his Discord. This is obviously before I'm married with a kid, right? But this is, I think COVID. Like, I just was married, and we're moving into we're moving into my wife being pregnant, and I'm talking to Faraday about various things, and he's having an identity crisis because after the New York Times article runs, he becomes like a radical leftist. Like, this is predictable, right? Something's wrong. You're a millennial. Things aren't going to plan. So if the radicalism of the right isn't working, maybe I can be a radical leftist. Problem there. The New York Times commenter comes back and says, wow, it looks like Faraday speaks. He stepped right out because he's saying that he's going too far to the left, like he's becoming a communist. And so the New York Times says, it looks like Faraday speaks stepped right out of a right-wing rabbit hole just to step into a left-wing rabbit hole. Of course, Faraday speaks is very, very unhappy about this characterization. I'm supposed to be an independent thinker, he says. I'm supposed to be able to think for myself. I'm supposed to be able to come to my own conclusions. And I tell him, well, yeah, but you haven't owned a position. And furthermore, you've presented your ideas as if you're the victim of your own ideas. For that, if you can be deceived into believing Stephen Molyneux, you can be deceived into believing Bernie Sanders or Professor Richard Wolff or any of those other old bread tubers. I don't know, Vosh. Oh no, I can't do that. I have to have a nuanced opinion. So I develop conservative opinions. Maybe I'm a National Review conservative. Well, the New York Times isn't like that either. Oh, well, have you examined the evidence for all of these things? The expert consensus? Oh no. And every position he takes doesn't feel right. He discards the alt-right because it doesn't look good. But what he doesn't understand is two things. First of all, once you describe yourself as being the victim of your own opinions, you immediately and inevitably set yourself up for being a victim of your new opinions. You don't own yourself. And the arguments that the alt-right produced about race and HBD, the same things that Nathan Coffness pushes forward, those arguments still exist. If you are like Alex Kashuda in an open debate, an open conversation, what do you do when those same arguments get put to you by more optical people? Two options. You either embrace those arguments and follow them where they take you, in which case you've walked down the dissident right or alt-right pipeline, or you reject them in order to maintain your status, or you do it very quietly. Once you leave the view from nowhere and develop a positive position that you try to own, the whole idea of denouncing people for mainstream optics immediately becomes so problematic, so impossible to entertain, that you essentially have to delete your online presence. You can't hold any opinions. You're a cipher. The destiny of the the destiny of the elite human capital is to obliterate themselves into irrelevancy, because their positive positions are either completely facile, completely self-serving like Steven Pinker, or if they're stated explicitly like Richard Anania, like, I'm creating human misery to drive the engine of techno-capital to be more Nietzschean. They're so disgusting that no rational person is going to embrace you as a thought leader. Your views have become either sterile or hideous by their own design. This is something that everyone's kind of dealing with right now, is we're trying to head off. This is the whole controversy that erupted this week, controversy of tribalism. Two competing GoFundMes between Carmelo Anthony, a black guy who murdered somebody, apparently over an argument with a seat, and then a woman who said the N-word on the playground. White America is changing radically. These stories can't be disaggregated from each other. The first one obviously was a very high-profile murder case. But what shocked white America was that even after the father of Austin Metcalf, the victim, even when he forgave Carmelo Anthony, the black community rallied around the killer and essentially protested his own innocence just because he was on their team. And now white America seems to have collectively decided that the use of the N-word is no longer illegitimate. Because in the wake of someone who would have eminently been canceled for saying the worst word imaginable of all things to a 5-year-old on a playground, a similar amount of money is being raised for her. And everyone's flabbergasted by this. Everyone, oh no, it's meme culture come to life. This is the internet interfering with what would ordinarily be our organic human existence. You know, just like the Canadians who think their organic experience is to try to start a fist fight with somebody in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons because Trump made a mean tweet. But the complete demographic transformation of their own society and the destruction of their traditions, that's just organically how things work. Tribalism is not an online phenomenon. Tribalism is real life. Tribalism is organically how everyone feels when they're not being memed or propagandized by the establishment. This is what the people, the normie cons on the Jordan Peterson side don't seem to quite realize is this is organic human reality. This is how it's not pretty. It's not good. It will lead to a destruction of our society. But this is not, I mean, this fight is going on online on GoFundMe. It is not a product of mimetic culture. In fact, the desire to suppress it is far more artificial. You can't stop it. This is the new reality. This is human existence under conditions of chaos. And our children have to live in that. And it's incredibly ugly. I started this channel in many ways to push back against what I saw. I mean, I was really to push back against liberalism and to convince, Sargon of Akkad, now known Carl Benjamin, that essentially right-wing ideas were the only kind of logical answer to the moment. But I also had the ambition to try to focus people on higher moral aspirations and away from petty tribalism. And look, I am a right-wing internationalist. I do believe that people have the right to preserve their own gene lines and their own nations. And people are always going to have allegiance to what we put in modern, their heritage, their ethnicity, what we now call in the modern world race, what other people have called a variety of different things, their clan, their patriarchy. That's good and normal. There will be exceptions, we'll handle them. But I'm somebody that believes that many different people have to be united under one common political banner of belief in order to have an ordered and good existence for our children. But tribalism is the reality. Tribalism is the reality, and this moralizing liberalism is this absolute fucking lie. It's the image of those houses on the shore of the California coast that are slowly falling into the ocean. And the owners, they built them in the 1930s and they were solidly in rock, and now they're sliding down. And they're not going to be there for very much longer. And if our plan is to have our children live in them, we have to have another option for that. Who's actually going to take ownership over this? Another controversy is the perennial Zoomer dialogue. Who is going to stand up for Zoomer young people and actually give them a path towards family? This is another thing about the gender wars. Early on in Alex Kashida's departure from the right wing, the gender wars were the primary thing that she was concerned about. The problem was like the incel menace, the problem of the online trolls that were dissatisfied with women. This is before she discovered the true motivations from leaving the right, which were economic policy, which was never discussed on her podcast. I really sympathized because I'm personally tired to be hearing about it myself. Look, I'm a right winger, but you hear Zoomer men complain about it and you say, oh, I've heard these complaints 1,000 times. I've watched the home math videos. I know what the problems are. I know that our systems are effed up. I know that we're in a giant snafu. What are we doing about it? What are you doing about it? I sympathize. Okay, well, good question. No one really has any solutions yet. Obviously, we could take some productive steps forward. But once you get past like the home math sort of incel coded complaints that people think are very, very tiresome, you realize that there's a whole subset of people who complain about complaining. Like there are the fair disputations of the world. There are the cartoons hate her of the world. There are half the guests that appeared on the Subversive podcast this last year. And they talk about the exact same things. They talk about the same gendered complaints, but there's zero ownership over them. We could talk about complaints, we can talk about solutions. But at some point you have to have ownership. That's the first step. Are you invested in a solution? Or are you invested in complaining, or worse, complaining about complaining? I had this conversation with Rod Dreher about a month ago, and this was the most frustrating conversation of my career. I felt like I lost the debate. It wasn't even really a debate. It was a conversation with Benjamin Boyce. But I've had conversations with virtually every one of the conservative liberal crowd on Benjamin Boyce's channel. And this one was like the final boss, because Rod Dreher, more than anyone else, was somebody who led me to right-wing beliefs to begin with. And now I'm sitting here face to face, kind of trying to pose a criticism of him that he hasn't gone far enough yet. And for the first part of the debate, I feel like I'm doing pretty well. I'm laying out the sort of, let's call them the Andrew Isker. Ironically enough, Rod Dreher mentions Andrew Isker before I do, in a negative capacity. And I don't agree with everything Andrew Isker says, but it's more or less my critique. Like, if you want to actually separate from the modern world, you have to get your skin in the game, and you have to get a little bit angry, and you have to flash a middle finger at the establishment. Like, that's necessary. That's necessary to take ownership over the Zoomer problem. I mean, I don't have I can't get Zoomer men wives, but I'm not going to tell them to get a job at Panda Express and marry the girl that's sitting next to them in the pews at church, because I know that doesn't work. I mean, it will work for some people. It kind of worked for me, and it will work for some other men too. who are lucky enough to cash in on the old ways. But I know that, so I don't have a solution, but I know that the first step is a degree of ownership and a degree of fightiness directed at the current establishment to show that you are essentially in the game. You've got skin in the contest. That's the first step. I know that's the first step. I make this point. I feel like I've gotten it through to Rod. And then he comes out with a series of questions. So what are you doing, Dave? What are you doing to fix the problem? Like, not vagaries, not theoretics. What are you actually doing? I answered the question about the organizations we started, but what are they actually, we're creating organizations to fight, but what are they actually fighting for? I list the objectives, but what are they actually going for in the long term? Like, every time I answer the question, there's another question that apparently I haven't answered. And it just keeps on going until I kind of lose my pacing and kind of sound flabbergasted. And, then the story is I don't have a good answer for what I want. I remember this debate tactic most prominently about 2 or 3 years ago when it came from PSA Sedge. You just keep on asking, what do you want? What do you want? What do you advocate for? And every time someone gives you an answer, you just get frustrated. What they really want is they want like a stereotype to dismiss you. They want like, what is a category that I can put your type of thought so that I can condemn it or that I can dismiss it? So if you give them something abstract, like I'm for Christian values, like everyone knows what that is. Or I follow like De Maestro or Italian elite theorists, like they also know what that is. But that's not good enough because you can't stereotype that. And so you have to pretend like you don't understand the answer. Even though there's no way that Rod Dreher doesn't know what Christian values are, which was a contention at one point. So I feel totally out of position. But then people were saying in the comment section, oh, Dave really missed the mark when he couldn't give a good answer to Rod Dreher's questions about what we should be building, even though like I named literal organizations and literal projects we are undertaking. The optics are that I'm flustered. And I'm just kind of scratching. Frame game is really king. I mean, I'm a part-timer. Like, this is my side hustle. This is the stuff that I do after I'm done with a 10-hour day at work and my kid's asleep. This is a little side project I have. Dreher, the person I'm talking to, they were pivotal in my own conversion. They're 20 years my senior, at least. And they've written 5 books, and they do speaking tours, and they're way more connected to the establishment. Why am I the person who's taking ownership over this? Why doesn't it even occur to pundits of Dreher's generation that there does need to be direct ownership over solutions? What does it mean? The throne is empty. This is the last topic I wanted to draw all of the other ones together. The death of Pope Francis. May he receive his eternal reward. And the beginning of a new era in the Catholic Church. It's another strange thing that happened to me when I was in California. Is that every single person I talked to, real estate agent, relatives and parents, co-workers, obviously this was online, over Zoom calls. They all had an opinion about Pope Francis. They were all talking about this movie called Conclave, which is another one of these Hollywood slop propaganda films. Oh, guess what? The new Pope is secretly transgender. They're super interested. What's your opinion on Conclave? What's your opinion on the actual conclave that's going on as we speak? I guess right now, literally, I think it's going on right now in Italy. As I have this this conference. And what are my feelings on this? Like, everyone, what's your opinion on Pope Francis? He was the Pope. He's my spiritual leader. I don't need to have an opinion on him. My opinion is there were decisions made in his papacy that massively confused the body of Catholics and that threatened schism in the church multiple times, and that made it harder to be unified as a church, not easier, despite Francis's proclamations to always want church unity. I have no doubt in my mind that he was a good man and a faithful Catholic. And that's all that's needed for popes, even if unwise decisions were made constantly. But I just feel like the universe is going to give us something, and it's not my job to sit by the sidelines and constantly guess or horse race, like keep up. What are the cardinals? Who's going to get elected? Who's moving where? Like, who's supporting who? Do you have your bracket filled out, like with March Madness? The March Madness bracket for who will be the next pope. Have you watched Conclave, the movie version of the Conclave, the star search for the Pope, now in movie form on Netflix? Every one of the people constantly talking to me about this, they don't attend church. They don't care about the spiritual direction of this thing. They're just here for the Catholic cinematic universe. There's a new development in the Netflix show called the Catholic Cinematic Universe. And so we here, as consumers of slop entertainment, have tuned in for the next thing, the next meaningless. It's the pageantry. People always say this. Oh, I love Conclave. Oh, do you care about Catholicism? No. But it's the pageantry. It's the pageantry. It's the I'm literally going to become. I'm literally. This is literally going to turn me into a puritanical Protestant, like Oliver Cromwell. Because when I hear about the pageantry of the conclave, the people are gawking over who don't even believe in God or Catholicism. I literally, there's this urge in me to grab getting angry again. There's this urge in me to grab a blunt object and to leap onto the table and start smashing things and go, away with all of these baubles, this Roman pageantry. This Roman pageantry needs to burn. I want to split every statue down the center. I want to smash all the stained glass. I want to burn every vestment that I see. I want to tear down all of this medieval pompous shit. I love it, but I want to destroy it every time I hear this. I don't care about the pageantry. I care about God. I want a pope because I want a spiritual leader, and I've gone beyond. The church is in an age of corruption. And even though very, very saintly people like John Paul II, which I believe is a saint, get into the papacy, they get dumped into a viper nest of politics that prevent their spiritual leadership from meaningfully manifesting where I need it to be. So even though the throne is filled in Rome, and even though it's a legitimate pope, in our lives, in our literal existences, the throne is empty. There are no spiritual leaders that I can cooperate with. I'm isolated, and surrounding me at every corner are these stupid baubles that remind me of the old world. These boomer bubbles that are everywhere, where people are isolating various parts of the 20th century, and they're locking out the outside world, and they're locking in their entertainment product, And all they care about is like the next little entertainment universe that they can plug into and enjoy for a spectacle, while keeping out the reality that is imminently hitting them. The crises that are infecting their children and their grandchildren, the crisis in confidence, the crisis in authority, the crisis in truth, the fact that we were lied to for 10 years, the fact that we have no spiritual direction, the fact that Zoomers can't form families, the fact that our society is atomizing, the fact that our civilization is crumbling, the fact that our demographics is falling apart, the fact that our financial system is collapsing, and not because of tariffs, because it's literally unsustainable on its face. All of those things. We're in the bubble. And right now, the bubble wants pageantry. The throne's empty. We have to fill it. And I'm sounding like a Protestant here, but in this age of chaos, the throne has to be filled by the people who want to stand up and fill it. Priests, lay people, Protestants, Orthodox. Just wave the banner of truth. Stand for something that isn't the view for nowhere. Indicate that you have any desire for truth, that this isn't signaling that you're an elite, that you're better than everyone else. Be the leader that leads in a certain amount of humility, and not servant leadership in the way that boomers use it. Like servant leadership as in you lead the charge from the front, like Richard the Lionhearted. Or servant leadership like the people who burn the idols down of their age. Or who do deeply embarrassing things, not because they don't want to be with people who are not optical, not because they don't want to be associated with the poor or the people who are low status, because you actually believe in something. You believe in a future. Do you believe in a divinity behind things? Like, show me those leaders. I think we do have some of those leaders. If I hope. I've seen some of them personally. I have people that I believe in and who I trust. And almost none of them are doing this professionally. I guess a few of them are. But they're the only people who are worth listening to. The only people who are worth listening to are the people who are aligned in value with you. And I don't care how many mistakes they make, as long as they're trying. As long as they're taking ownership and they're trying their best. I don't care if they're stupid. I don't care if they make mistakes. I care that they are morally aligned with a vision of hope and divinity, that they're pulling in the right direction, that they have good faith, that they have faith, that they're aligned to the divine throne. Anyway, guys, that's the end of the lecture portion, and we'll do the super chats now. That got heated, but I hope everyone appreciated it, and we can go on to the super chat section. What is this? Here we go. All right, perfect. I should really upload the podcast. Okay, here we go. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So guys, if you are on Twitter, I guess I will reply in the space. I do not know how to link I do not know how to link things on Twitter via I have no idea how to put this link in Twitter. I guess I can kind of link it here, but if you want, maybe I can do it this way. Man, this is such a bad design system with this. I'm gonna kill my stream doing this. All right. Whatever. So guys, if you go to YouTube, the YouTube link, there is a link to Entropy where I received the donation. So this time I usually take about an hour doing this. I use to answer questions, and I will always end with a psalm at the end, just to kind of. I noticed that there's a lot more people signed on this. I think when I get angry, people really like this show. Like when I get really angry, people like the show more. I don't know why. I'm just so furious at this elite human capital stuff. People are saying like, "Oh, is it because of betrayal? Is it because you were such an Alex Kashida super fan that you're angry like at her turn?" No, not really. I would be totally fine if she became a progressive. I actually hope that she becomes a socialist or whatever. It's really the academic pretension. It's really these people who like want to they want to get into these positions of academic authority and like shit over everyone on political positions that they never take ownership over. Um anyway, let's do the super chats. Ben White for $3 USA. I hope you and your family had a wonderful Easter, Dave. I remember playing chess and eating food with the guys at my parish for our post-Lent feast day, and the Pope dies the next day. Bleh. I'll continue this. For at least one more day, we can all say sede vacante. The seat is the throne is empty, literally. But in all seriousness, I have taken this opportunity to take a step back from following secular news and focus on my spiritual life. God bless. Yeah, I always remember this. Like, wasn't able to do this with my brother this year, but in my parish back in the old days when I first became Catholic, the pattern was we always used to go to the Easter Vigil, which was always the most trad-coded ceremony of the entire year. Usually it was like mostly in Latin, super cool. And then the next day, when we were breaking our fasts, and we would like just not eat food for Friday and very little on Saturday, like super hungry. Then the next day, we would always go to a Brazilian steakhouse, like an all-you-can-eat Brazilian steakhouse. They charge you an arm and leg to get into these places, but you can eat all the steak you want. And we would just eat so much steak that we would go into a coma. It was probably not very pious to binge, but it was as kind of grad students, it was super fun to do that. But anyway, playing chess seems like I was never much of a chess fan. I love strategy games, but I always want my strategy games to have a component of randomness to them. And the fact that chess is objective, like it takes the fun out of it for me, right? A good game has to be less random than poker, which is a little bit too random, and not as objective, not as deterministic as Go or chess. Next chat is Mississippi for $10. Conning gatekeepers are probably right. The woke right label will scare normies and cost MAGA new elections or next elections. I think this is a necessary step and that enough seeds have been planted in minds for the future. Temperament of the country isn't ready yet for what's necessary, but will be after the left's revenge. Maybe. I think that the left-right distinction might collapse in the next 5 years just because of the massive amount of instability. But maybe the left will have one more chance to do its revenge fantasy. God knows there is a subset of them that really, really wants to draw blood and is really horny about it. But let's hope that we can be out of the path of that wrath when it occurs. Ben White for $3 USA. At Mississippi, I am optimistic about the future, but what's necessary cannot be accomplished by a president who needs to worry about what people think every 4 years. Only a king or a dictator can succeed. Yeah, and guys, even if we do get a Caesar, the problem is that in the Spenglerian cycle, Caesar rules over civilizational fall. The religion has already died. The civilization is already spiritually dead. The Caesars ruled over a civilization whose core motivating religious and artistic impulse had already died with the Republic. There is a brief burst of great creativity when Augustus first came in, and then it quickly just dissipated into hedonism. And so even if we get a Caesar that makes the empire last for a little bit before real chaos sets in, as much as I want that cup to be taken from my lips, that means we have to retreat further into the wilderness in order to discover where God is, because God's certainly not with Caesar. And it feels like we're really far away from a genuine rebirth, aka Charlemagne and Benedict. But either way, rotten meat for $3 USA. These people are so fake, they're just there to take up attention span. Intellectual squid ink. Yeah, that's true. I mean, the elite human capital is done. I don't know. I always ever tell myself, this is the last time I'll ever talk about this stupid, Richard Hanania, Nathan Kaufness, Alex Kashuta thing ever again. And they find another way to get into the news cycle, and people demand that I talk about them when I really rather, during this time that this Alex Kashuta thing was erupting, I was writing like a 20,000 word essay on books, and no one read it. They read my more people read my Substack notes on Alex Kashuta than read my very passionate essay on the nature of literacy and civilizational restoration. Alex Kashuta's read about one thing: drama sells, but I know what I'm marketing that's not drama. Does Alex? I'm not so sure. I doubt it. I doubt there's a future for this scene once they're constantly causing catastrophes for people like me. I don't. What's the interesting thing that they're going to take up? Certainly not Christianity, apparently. Certainly not religion. Certainly not trad lifestyles. Were they going to do the based version of the polycule? Hey guys, we fixed Ayla's birthday gangbang, so now it's based. Now we're going to do it right this time. We're going to do New York Times style degeneracy, but we've debugged the errors. We've made it elite. Before it wasn't effectively altruistic enough, and now we've effectively, we've we've turned the corner. We've aligned it. I don't know. There's nothing good coming from this sphere. Absolute Defender for $5 USA. Jordan Peterson hasn't fallen. This is who he always was. His biggest fear is the right-wing backlash. He will forever prefer progressivism to its alternatives. It's why I can never trust him despite the good that he did. Yeah, but he wrote some good books, he gave some good advice, and his early Jungian stuff was genuinely interesting. His early Bible lectures were quite good back in the day. And, I don't fault him for being a boomer or being a normie con. I just don't think he's well enough to do what he's called to do job-wise. He's too emotionally incontinent. I mean, that's what it is, right? Someone's asking me for the contact information for a super chatter. I can't disclose that, man. I see your at reply in the chat. I can't disclose contact information. You have to, I don't even know if I have it. Unfortunately, if they're a writer, or if they're with the Old Glory Club or the Exit Group, maybe I can reach out. But other than that, my options are limited. Thank you, Absolute Defender. Let's go on to Asteroidal Assassin for $5 USA. He says, to steel man the woke right, here are some issues that the modern dissident right have. There's too much cynical and self-serving focus on racialism and IQ. Not concerned with poor people, abortion, supporting the U.S., and destroying other countries. Well, okay, I get why people harp on the HBD thing. The HBD thing is poison for the modern academy, and it is almost certainly true. So if you can get the academy to take that poison pill like Nathan Kaufman does, you can humiliate them in discrete circumstances. But the problem is, you can't... This poison pill does cause our enemies to be humiliated, but it doesn't destroy them. The mainstream can sustain an infinite number of Steven Pinkers and not suffer any long-term damage, as it is demonstrated time and time and time and time again. This is not one of their immediate problems. It is absolutely not. Eric Thomas for $10 USA. How do you and your how do you view our current elites? Uh, are they true elites? Are they imposters? They hate Americans. The right has a notion that we have a talent, a la J.D. Vance, being suppressed in the heartland via the Longhouse, impeding modern day Kitty Hawks. Um, the elite human capital are correct that the mainstay of the white talent is currently owned by moderate progressive mainstream. If you've made it in the modern world, if you're like a finance bro, if you're somebody who has kind of a career at UC Berkeley or another institution, and like you're a well-to-do white guy who's not woke, you're almost certainly a Democrat or are in kind of the ambit of one of these parties that is looking for moderation in the modern world. The problem is that the elite human capital are not going to be able to woo these people because they deal in some ideological heresies that create HR problems for these people with professional ambitions. The people who are these turbo professionals just want to keep their head down and earn money and insulate themselves on the margins. They are much, much, much more amenable on questions over meaning and spirituality, and they're much, much more reachable but unapologetic portrayals of confidence. In some sense, like Trump is a little bit of a symbol of how leadership goes, because I do know some people in the elite spheres that have indicated that they're more on Trump's side than they were on Kamala Harris's side. And it's just because of Trump, and it's not because they have bitten down on the demographic crisis or they understand the consequences of these liberal systems failing, or even that they're Jordan Peterson fans. They just don't like wokeness. They're looking for an alternative. And they see Trump as a dynamic individual that is going to, be there. Like he's not an admirable moral person, but he's a magnetic personality who has a magnanimous aura about him. And in the wake of that, they kind of orbit around him a little bit. They're drawn to him to a certain degree. So the right genuinely has a human capital problem at the elite level, specifically for the millennial generation. I do not believe that this elite problem for the right wing will carry over to the Zoomers. I think almost all elite Zoomer men will be some variation of politically apathetic or just out and out right wing in one way, shape, or form. Either that or they'll be complete sociopaths like Gavin Newsom. There is no space for elite white men inside any progressive space that even has a hint of DEI. They are all people who have completely drunk the Kool-Aid and are in some kind of weird, debilitating self-humiliation ritual. The future is somewhere between the technocrats and the right wing, and the technocrats are going down, a dead end of their own making that I have explained numerous times. In other places, perhaps a little less angrily than I described tonight, but thank you. Yeah, it's a problem to be solved, and unfortunately, the problem is not the problem is how do we get Zoomer men to succeed and to form families that will keep them aligned to the right wing and not just consumed by cynicism and nihilism. That's the mission that we have right now. Maybe on the margins, how we can convince millennials to come over to the right side before everything goes tits up. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. Bro, you're gonna get marauders in raccoon hats. Okay, I'm not sure I got that reference. Davy Crockett, the Alamo, raccoon hats. Asteroidal Assassin says again for $3. The reason you got your back injury was because God wanted you to protect Canada from your wrath. Yeah, I did get my back injury just before I started my blog. and it was from doing CrossFit. So CrossFit is awesome, but be very, very careful about throwing out your back. It caused me to get fat and to start a YouTube channel. So be warned, kids. CrossFit could cause you to become fat and a vlogger. I'm still trying to lose the weight, but it's it's, at my age, it's much harder. Nerve and VMaker for $10 USA. Given your recent Substack on language and poetry, I think you should read and listen to Lord Dunsey's The King of Elfland's Daughter. He has a passage where he compares the footprints of animals in the snow to the deeds of kings on the white pages of history. That is stunning. A true prose poet. Well, I will definitely remember that. Wow. The King of Elfland strikes me as very, very Chestertonian. And as everyone knows, like most Catholic millennials, I've got a very, very big soft spot for Chesterton. And, but thank you very much, Nerve Envy Maker. That's a good suggestion. Pragmatic Culture for $5 USA. Hi, Dave. I'm not understanding the Richard Hanania as Contra as a substitute to Nick Fuentes. Not saying that it's not there, but I'd like to hear you expand on it. Well, was Richard Hanania? I mean, he's anti-incel. He's pro-technocrat. He's pro-Zionism, whereas Nick Fuentes is very, very anti-Zionism. Nick Fuentes absolutely is the enemy number one of our political donor class. They're the enemy that they all love to hate, whereas Richard Hanania is trying to be the right-winger that they can secretly like and secretly give money to, which is probably why he's doing this professionally, even though the guy churns out totally shit takes and slop articles that I don't even think are particularly well written, to be honest. But that's my statement about why Richard Hanania is the anti-Nick Fuentes, for what it's worth. Nerve and VMaker for $5 USA. This diagnosing your political opposition as a psychological disorder is nothing new. Hofstadter did it in his book, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, and applied it to everyone who opposed the New Deal. It's a tactic that is automatically discrediting. Yeah, this is the Hofstadter argument, right? What is this? The Richard Hofstadter, the patterns of American radicalism, the paranoid style in American politics, right? He's the guy that wrote the paranoid. I'm confirming this. Yeah, the paranoid style in American politics. This is where we get our idea of the conspiracy theory. Everyone who questions the post-war consensus is a conspiracy theorist. That's why people who follow the data and were right about the lab leak theory were conspiracy theorists. It's because of Richard Hofstadter's book. Is it immediately discrediting? It's rhetoric for sure. It's not an argument. It's done dishonestly. But, at the same time, I mean, this is a known human problem. People take paranoia and they run with it because paranoia does have a market. And there were people who were genuinely paranoid, both now and then, and who have gone way too far. So I wouldn't say that just because I criticize people as being paranoid and having kind of conspiracies that are unhinged from what could even possibly happen, given how, human social orders work, the people who think the world is hollow or whatever, or who believe in, Illuminati conspiracy theories. I'm doing it right now, right? I mean, yeah, there are genuine kooks out there, and it's an appealing entertainment product. But if you follow this and just use this as a willy-nilly way to discredit and throw under the bus everyone who questions the mainstream, and then put it on blast for the New York Times, I don't know what to say. I mean, you've destroyed the intellectual space, and eventually you'll destroy your own intellectual product. This whole thing is, it's been going on for a very long time. Pietro Dominic for $5 USA. Canadians have always been passive-aggressive little shits. My dad's American, I'm Canadian, and all the pathetic and snide comments were there growing up. It has eroded all I love for the faux nationalism of normie Canadians. Yeah, I don't know. I really wish Canada could be what John Carter wants it to be, the Prussia of the North. I really wish that we could have the spirit that you see in the history of Quebec and in the Tory tradition of English speaking Canada and of the pioneers and all the great stories, the North American martyrs that were, I think, Canadians. But the spirit is in such a minority that it will have to essentially be an island because the Liberal Party just got handed the biggest mandate that they've the boomer pride gave the Liberal Party in Canada their biggest mandate that they've ever had, and they're going to use that mandate to drive this country straight into the ground. And I pray that it won't be as bad as I think it will be, but there isn't going to be a halt to mass migration anytime soon. Alex Wegner for $3 USA. Hi, Dave. How do you engage with religion properly? How do you know you believe it, find it truthful, useful, and real? That's a struggle. I feel that I feel like on an intuitive level that God must be real. But as a modern person, you notice this. I have said this many times. Every time I'm not directly looking at the arguments for why the historical record of the Bible is true, my mind immediately begins to doubt it. So I doubt it. Like it's a fallible human institution. Everything is lies. I'm not convinced what happened in a battle that went on next week in Israel. How am I so convinced about what happened in a battle that went on 3,000 years ago? Every time that the doubts creep in, and doubt kind of, it's like literally degeneration because it stops you from being kind of a complete person that can act with purpose and just kind of leaves you in a state of despondency where you can't do anything because you doubt everything. You doubt the Enlightenment. You doubt the existence of Christ. You doubt that there even was a universe. You doubt that the world isn't a simulation. At some point, you just have to say, like, I've committed to this and I am going to live my life now. And like Conan the Barbarian said, if the world is a dream, then I am no more than a dream in it. If God doesn't exist, then I'm not so sure I exist. So what does it even mean to be me if I don't take a stand and believe that something has meaning and purpose and that there's good in the universe? Then there's no use in taking any action. And the good that I see in front of me, in the best example I have of it, in the most reliable religion that I can find, is the goodness that must be revelation. I don't know how to deal with absolute doubt more than that. But for what it's worth, that's my answer. Absolute Defender for $3 USA. Young people buy Hanania. What a ripoff. Young guys used to buy Orion Folk. Mr. Folk truly was a prophet. Race, magic words, institution, and experts. You name it, he was right there ahead of the curve. Was Ryan Falk magic words? I thought I was the person who came up with. I mean, magic words is based on a lecture given by Jonathan Bowden, but I'm pretty sure that I was the magic words guy. Ryan Falk was the alternative hypothesis guy. He was Mr. Human Biodiversity much more than I was back in the day. But either way, I mean, the problem with Kaufness and Hanania are that, like, young, intelligent guys, even if they're not technically autistic, they tend to think autistically. They tend to think like, if I just find all the facts that are wrong, then like I can fix the system because thinking is about finding the wrong facts. It's like a word search for finding wrong facts, because spirituality requires a leap of faith, and I don't like doing that. I like math. I like objective subjects. So I'm going to fact check my way to victory. And the fact check my way to victory is exactly what gives you Richard Hanania. It's exactly what gives you Nathan Kaufness. It's exactly what gives you Steven Pinker. And the problem is that one moment you're trying to fact check the establishment into believing HBD, which they'll admit on the margins, but the establishment can just double back on itself and find a little error in your reasoning. They can find a little error in your reasoning, and they can discredit you, and they can say that you're a bad actor. Like that guy, like non-Zionism, the guy that was on Kashuda's podcast that came after me, right? Because Dave, because you retweeted this Daryl Cooper thing, you are spreading misinformation and you should discontinue your blog. It's like, whatever. Like I decide how impactful mistakes are. And if I'm the person who can decide how impactful mistakes are, then I can make sure that all your mistakes are, earth-shattering cataclysms that should end your career. And all my mistakes are they're just little minor errors that I happen to make. You cannot fact check your way to victory, but young men and autistic men like to think this, which is why they buy into Hanania's shtick. And it's tragic because Steve Saylor said there's an alliance between autists and establishmentarians. Like every single time he'd publish an observation, there would be like defenders of the status quo that would try to discredit him by finding one mistake, like one casual mistake in a document that was more or less good. And of course, this works to the benefit of the establishment, which is the null hypothesis, the default assumptions. When he was still around, I criticized Ryan Falk along the same lines, even though he probably was much better than Richard Hanania. Ben White for $5 USA. Man, I remember when Alex and Pedro Gonzalez were on RN show multiple times, IIRC, maybe on other live streams as well. They seemed like reasonable people. I have to wonder if they genuinely changed opinions or if they were just pretending all along. Yeah, I've wondered that too. I have no idea. I think Pedro is absolutely sincere, but I don't know. I just can't do the whole Kushida thing anymore. I tried for so long to talk this disaster. I saw it coming. Everyone said this person is 2 months away from running a piece that condemns everyone in the New York Times, implicitly or explicitly. And sure enough, it was there. It happened. And it's not ignorance. It can't be ignorance. They must know what this does. They must know what this does to everyone. It takes all, people have sacrificed career opportunities, their time, thousands of dollars of their own money to try to do something in the real world, and it puts a giant target on their backs. It takes all of the goodwill that they've tried to build with people in their own blue state communities, and it just nukes it. And for what? For what? So they can get into the good graces of Michelle Goldberg? This person wouldn't, someone who said this, Conundrum Cluster said this. This person, Michelle Goldberg, wouldn't piss on Pedro Gonzalez or Alex Kashuda if they were on fire. She absolutely hates them. They're just a convenient stepping stone to get at her enemies. Sean Schaefer for $5 USA. Rule by experts really seems to be the type of rule. No accountability with all of the smugness. No humility. The ancients understood experts can have high status, but only as a public servant. Bring back viziers and court eunuchs. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. Kaufness's article, I hope we go through with his plans to come in and talk about this, because his idea of how this works is completely incoherent. Okay, yeah, defer to the experts on an ongoing war where we know all of the information is probably being provided by governments is probably lies. In this situation, we need to defer to the experts. This is absolutely nuts. Um, Asteroidal Assassin for $5 USA. I think we as Zoomer incels should, one, channel our anger into a solution instead of moping. Two, just completely disregard what women say or think about anything. Don't even bother trying to involve them with discourse or explain your ideas to them. Yeah, I think that, look, every now and again, there's a woman like Aiden Powlin who can definitely do politics, but I'm done trying to find the next validating person eager online to make me look presentable. It never ends well. I don't know what it is. It might be just about how the female mind works in these spaces, because you certainly can't talk them down. Like, they get this idea. Like I said, I left the internet during Lent of 2024. I come back and every single woman is furious, seemingly at me. Like, people like DM me with, like, obviously furious at me just because I describe them as being upset at the right when they've announced that they're upset at the right on social media. And there's no reason, and you can't argue. And the more you try to argue them off of their, like, war path, the more they want to go on the war path. And because you're not physically present, you can't reframe the issue, which is usually the solution to these problems in real life. And I don't want to manage this anymore. I don't. I'm not. I do. I'm a husband. I know these feelings have to be managed and redirected into good places, but I can't do this with women online. It takes too much energy, and it leads to too much destruction. Conact for $5 USA. Hi, Dave. Love your work. My wife is Canadian, but we live in the left coast of the US. Hey, soon to me. I'm soon to be living on the left coast too with my Canadian wife. Sadly, she has sensed outright hysteria bordering on hostility from her family and friends to the point that she um, doesn't feel comfortable visiting the Fraser Valley, and risk an unpleasant experience for our kids. Also, I'm an ex-Quillette associate, Facebook discussion group, and lately it's been full off Trump tariff and Jewish. Well, this is interesting. And Jewish left and right Civil War ranting. I feel like so much of our discourse is disproportionately left by feuding Jews of various political persuasions, like we are acting out a script written for us. Eh, Okay, number four. Hopefully, this is the last one. It's very distributed here. Um, and all I want is Christian and national unity. Yeah, it. Yeah, what is it with this Quillette crowd? It's Quillette. It's fair disputations. It's unheard. Every spring, like something, like it was like this. It was like this. Like Lauren Southern too. Like they all get angry at once. They all like, and they go off on some vector, something that they're angry about that was never part of the discourse before, and they launch like a variety of veiled personal attacks that are obviously directed at some people in particular, if you read in between the lines, but they never mention who they're going after in public, except when they accidentally do, like Alex on Pedro's podcast, where she drops raw egg nationalist, which I think she probably now regrets because what was said probably wasn't true. Um, and it's all veiled personal attacks, and they're all furious about an issue that was never discussed before. And they're always like, in Israel is always the number one priority, and for the the Fuentes crowd in the audience. No, these people are not Jewish themselves. Most of these people are indigenous European goyim like myself. Most of them are either atheists or Christians or Catholics. It's not, these are not Jewish thinkers. But something snaps in, some movement happens. It seems to be at this time every year, and we go off on another, like, absolutely unhinged, self-destructive tirade collectively. And I'll never understand why. I'll never understand why. I'm lucky that my Canadian family is more or less based and is like I've complained about them, unfortunately, on this podcast. Even I feel a little bit guilty about that, but they're very nice people. They're very very generous people, and I'm very glad that I'm not getting any hostility from them. It's just funny how frequently leading up to the Canadian election, I got like this anti-American like interaction, specifically when I'm driving the car. Like it's always that was the American license plate, and it's always at some kind of like established Canadian like retail store brand. That's when Canadians really feel their nationalism. Thank you though. Sam 153 for $50 USA. Hope your Easter. Oops, sorry. Hope your Easter was joyous, Dave. You are correct. Canadian boomers are in severe cognitive dissonance and irrational anger over Trump. Their thinking is stuck in the 1960s to 1990s. It's infuriating and deeply sad, as I think we all secretly want the boomers to redeem themselves. Surely there is some sign of this hope. Otherwise, cheers. The boomers are going to redeem themselves, hopefully, by rediscovering religion in their twilight years. It will not be a politically aligned religion, but I think it will be a devout one. And I don't have evidence for this. This is just a sort of like a Tolkien-esque catastrophic hope. A catastrophe will occur, and the boomers will rediscover the utility of religion in their twilight years. I think something is coming. That's how I think the boomer redemption arc will happen. They will set the seeds for a civilization rebirth, not in Caesar, but in the catacombs. But thank you very much. I have $5 Canadian for Dark Voyager. Thank you very much for sparing my voice. I have Ben White for $5 who says, scientific bias and fraud. I wonder if this has to do with the rise of scientism and religion. As religion waned, science became the new god, and this made it easy for Machiavellians to shape scientific publishing for their own ends and money. No. Yes and no, right? Like, as science became the new god, science became political. Once something becomes political, it does not need bad actors to corrupt itself. Politics naturally corrupts anything it touches. Politics is war, and war is lying. And so when war interacts with scientific truth finding, it naturally becomes corrupted. That's what this thing does. It does not need bad actors. It will generate bad actors by the degenerative property of how truth and human civilization naturally works. But thank you. Conact for $5 USA. 4. And all I want is Christian. Oh, that's part of the last tweet. Thank you very much, though, again, for being so generous and giving $20 across 4 tweets. Obadiah Vandal says for $3. Great stream, Dave. Hope you've heard of the Stone Choir guys. I bet you and Corey could have a pretty interesting conversation. Good night and God bless. So it's kind of funny, right? Like, I really loved Corey Muller when I heard him, like how he spoke, how he held himself, the seriousness with which he took biblical scriptures. And I'm like, man, like I wish he was Catholic. This is exactly the kind of Protestant that I really, really look up to. And then I came across a bunch of like edgy tweets, and I'm like, oh man, like I understand that he's trying to troll the boomers, but there's a few right-wing takes that I am absolutely allergic to. And one of them is like, Joseph Goebbels was a good man and did the right thing when he murdered his own children. This is the absolute like Mendoza line for like shitty online edgelord takes. I am convinced Joseph Goebbels was a sociopath. I understand that human beings, when they're in a conference together, it's very, very easy for them to sign papers that send millions of civilians to their deaths. And if you were a leader in 1930s, whether you were Roosevelt or Truman or Stalin or Churchill or Hitler or Mussolini, you signed papers that sent millions of civilians to their deaths. That is what you did. And you don't know ahead of time whether it's 1 million or 6 million, whether they die in fire or gas, whether they're sent to the firing squads, or whether they're just the tragic casualties of a napalm explosion or a nuclear explosion. That's all details. You're all just signing papers. And so it's plausible to me that non sociopaths like were in the Wannsee conference and set that whole disastrous, clusterfuck in motion. Uh, it does take a sociopath to murder your own children, souls that have been put in your possession, to look into your eyes and murder them. And people are like, oh, well, he had no other option. They would have been raped to death by Stalin's armies. They didn't need to be in Berlin. They could have gotten out. Lots of people got out. Lots of Nazi Party officials got out. Some people from the Wannsee Conference got out. They all got to South America, and well, it's arguable that, Allied and Israeli forces would have chased Goebbels to the end of the earth. They probably wouldn't have chased Madame Goebbels to the end of the earth, and they certainly wouldn't have executed their children if they weren't there in Berlin in 1945. I can't square this. This is a shit take. This is absolutely sociopathic behavior, and it indicates that the Nazi leadership had serious spiritual pollution in their ranks. And I know that Corey Mauler was probably just trying to troll like the evangelical mainstream. But, come on. I mean, like, I'm valuing you because you're serious and sober and don't do this edgelord stuff. Can't you just say what you mean and mean what you say? I say this after a podcast where I got really, really angry and probably hyperbolically said a bunch of things that I don't mean in the exact form in which I said them, and that I'll need to retract later. And certainly, I'm sure Corey Muller will just say, well, like I didn't mean it in the way I said it. But I really wish people could kind of be more sober about this stuff, because we really need to be able to call a spade and call Nazi war crimes, especially when those war crimes were against our own kin, which you'd think people who understand the importance of kin would understand. But I've liked his other work, and so I'm open to giving Corey Muller, I'm sure he's great work. Seeing him in other contexts, it sounds like this is a person who will be doing good work in the future. And certainly a model on how to hold yourself. Man, that guy is a cool cucumber. I wish I could be that cool. Ben White for $3 USA. Do you think the left casts who loved Francis will go into schism if we get a more orthodox pope? Or do you think that many of them are just really hyper ultra monetists and will back the pope regardless? Oh, no. I mean, some of them will fall away from the Catholic Church, but most of them will just slink away into the shadows. Most of the people who were big Pope Francis left Caths, they'll just get really quiet. They'll just go with the flow. These people have very, very weak wills. When they're in a group, when they think they have the Pope at their side, they get really loud. When they lose, they get really quiet. And if it looks like they've permanently lost, what will happen is they'll pretend to have had the orthodox opinions the entire time. That's what will happen. And I think that, I don't know, I'm expecting a left-wing Pope to come out of this conclave. And look, it's not going to be the end of the church. They will not contradict doctrine. They might trigger a schism. I pray to be on the right side of that schism, because that's very, very scary for me spiritually. But I'm not expecting to have like Pope-based Pius the 17th or whatever, right? Based Pius the 17th. I don't know. It's not gonna. It's probably not going to happen. Although I would so much want the church to be a spiritual leader in this age. Penultimo for $3 USA. Rod Dreher showed on your debate that he's just too invested in the establishment to ever support real change. His solution just amounted to, we can vote our way back and refuse to hear otherwise. Yeah, I mean, he's giving this line about pluralism. I mean, like, what does pluralism mean? Yeah, we've got many different religions in this country. So did Spain. So did the Ottoman Empire. So did the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So did Russia. So did all pre-modern Christian civilizations. But there is always a reigning religion. Like you're either willing to accept that historic reality and responsibly wield power, or you're going to be in a mode of eternal retreat. And I think Rod has decided at some deep level that he wants to be an eternal exile. He wants to be an eternal retreat. And it's just not responsible for somebody with a young child to say that, like, my role is to be eternally in a mode of retreat. We have to try to make the world at least better in microcosm. Eric Thomas for $5 USA. So, more so about our current elite. Once the WASPs get removed and our current elite even are our current elite even supposed to be there? How would Moscow view this? Is our society so deranged right now because we have this group of elites that shouldn't be elites? I mean, look at Congress. Well, I mean, our elite hasn't been predominantly WASP for like 30 years. It's mostly like Catholics and Jews at this stage. And to the extent that it's white, whatever that means, it's mostly Catholics and Jews. Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's arguable that that ethnic change that occurred in the 70s is the reason why our current civilization is degrading so fast. I don't think it is the real reason. The real reason is the lack of religiosity. That is always the driver of civilizational change. But I don't know. I mean, this change has already happened, Eric. That's what I would say. I don't know how Moscow would view it. I don't really have a very strong understanding of even how Moscow would regard this time. So we'll see. Anyway, guys, that is it for the super chats. So I will read our psalm. The psalm today is Psalm 5. Listen to my words, Lord. Consider my lament. Hear my cry for help, my King and my God. For to you I pray. In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay the request before you and wait expectantly. For you are not a God who is pleased with wickedness. With you, evil people are not welcome. The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. You hate all who do wrong. You destroy those who lie. The bloodthirsty and deceitful you detest. But I, your great love, can come to your house in reverence and bow down toward your holy temple. Lead me, Lord, in your righteousness. Because of my enemies, make your way straight before me. Not a word from their mouths can be trusted. Their hearts are filled with malice. Their throats is an open grave. In their tongues they tell lies. Declare them guilty, God, for their intrigues be their downfall. Banish them for their many sins, for they have rebelled against you. But let those who take refuge in you be glad. Let them ever sing your joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may rejoice in you. Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous. You surround them with your favor as with a shield. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining me for Fiddler's Greene podcast number 58. And I will see you all next time. Good luck, good night, and have a blessed